managed to stop him. They all accepted to join him when telling the king and protect Robert and his interests. They also agreed to only bring Sir Robert Royce into the plot, even though his father was still out in the Kingswood with Robert. They agreed they could trust him. The evening meeting with Sir Robert played out similarly, and his reaction to the news was much the same as Sir Roland's. He pledged himself to the plot and he swore that he would convince his father when he arrived. He told Alan to be on guard and double the patrols and watches at any time of the day or night. He was feeling like he was getting paranoid, but with the Lannisters you never knew. After checking up on Veon, Hullen and Alan's work, he went to bed. He fiercely hoped Robert would return soon. Sometimes the gods were cruel. He had prayed for them to bring his friend back soon and they did, but he was mortally wounded. He had just left Robert's chambers. Robert had named him regent and protector of the realm. In turn he had made a promise to protect his children. He would do just that, as he thought about Gendry, who had safely left King's Landing. He thought about Maya in the Vale, Edric Storm in Storm's End and Barra here in King's Landing. There were probably others as well, and he would find and protect them as well. First, he needed to deal with the situation with the Lannisters though. As he walked away from Robert's chambers, Littlefinger had approached him and proposed something that couldn't be called anything else than treason. He had refused, of course. Stannis was the rightful heir and only he would act decisively with the Lannisters, while also defending Robert's natural-born children. If that led to another war, then so be it. He had thought about asking Littlefinger to arrange the city watch for him, but what he knew of the man had stopped him. He might have betrayed his liege lord by sleeping with his wife and passing his son off as the man's heir. Besides that, he had also publicly slandered the wife and her sister, his own cat, in public. He didn't think that such a man could ever be trusted, and so he had held his tongue. This didn't mean that he could afford to lose the support of the city watch. He would send Veon with an offer towards their commander and captains immediately. He would offer them 4,500 golden dragons. The sum would be divided as follows: 1/3 for the commander, 1/3 for the captains and 1/3 for the men. He was sure that would be more than enough. He would take the gold out of the treasury after they had captured Cersei. He also had the support of 2 of the captains already, he was sure of that, so that made his life easier. He instructed Veon, who immediately went on his way. He then sat at his desk, as he thought about the numbers. He had come to King's Landing with 50 guards and Jory to command them. He had lost Jory and 4 guards against Sir Jaime, 5 men had accompanied Sansa to White Harbour and Tamard was on the way to Stannis Baratheon. That left him with 40 men, while the Lannisters could call upon 100 men at arms and a dozen knights. He needed more men, or they would be overwhelmed. Lord Beric could call upon a dozen of his friends and men at arms. Sir Roland had promised to join with his 5 men of House Caron, and House Royce could call upon 20 men. All in all, that still only made for around 80 men if everyone would fight, a huge improvement and possible but still a very uncomfortable number. As such he was elated when Veon returned 3 hours later with the news that the City Watch had accepted and would help him on the morrow. Veon himself had also spoken with the 2 new captains and both had reassured him of their loyalty towards the Hand. Veon had said. All had been going well until Yohn Royce knocked on his study. "Ned, we need to talk," he said sternly. "Yes, of course, Yohn, come in," he said understandingly. "I heard from Robert what you are planning to do. I heard the evidence and I have gazed upon the children and I think you are in the right. However, I can't support you in this. It is suicide, plain and simple. Even with the allies you have gathered, the Lannisters still outnumber you and they control the Kingsguard. How do you plan to do anything against them? How am I to send my son in a plot doomed to fail?" Yohn explained, clearly fearful for Robar's life. "Wouldn't it be best if we were to go to our homes and rally our troops from there? If you rally the North and I the Vale, together with Hoster, Stannis and Renly, we could beat the Lannisters easily." The man continued. "It could work, yes, but it wouldn't be so easy. Lord Stannis is the rightful heir to the throne, Yohn, and because of that the Tyrells, Redwynes and Greyjoys might join the Lannisters out of fear of Lord Stannis. It would mean a very big civil war. It would be the rebellion all over again. That can all be avoided if the Queen, her brother and her children are captured together with the Lannister cousins residing in the capital. If we use them as hostages, Tywin would have to bend. Besides that, The Greyjoy and Redwyne heirs are also in the city, and so their houses could be motivated to stay neutral, allowing Lord Stannis to control the sea. Jon looked at him in thought before finally relenting. You might be right in this course of action, but this doesn't change the fact that even with my help you are outnumbered by the Queen. He looked seriously at his mentor's old friend. That has been arranged. My steward has made contact with the City Watch and they are with us. When we move, all the gold cloaks in the Red Keep will join us in the fight, while the remainder will pacify the city for us if need be. Now Jon looked surprised before a small grin covered his face. Yes, then his can work. I'll give you my support, Ned, but maybe not how you wish it. What do you mean? Well, my son Robar and most of my guard will stay here under your command. In contrast, 2 of my guard, the servants and I will board the earliest ship to Gulltown and will try to raise the Vale troops against the Lannisters. If everything works to plan and I am swift, I can lead the Valyman here in defense of you and the capital before the Lannisters or maybe the Tyrells can siege it. Tywin Lannister would have to cross the Riverlands before he manages to get here. That doesn't look such a threat to me, he said pensively, as he wanted the support of high-ranking and well-liked Lord like Bronze Jon on his side whilst taking control as protector of the realm. That may be, but remember the rebellion, Ned. The Riverlands were fractured then and it may be fractured again. If Tywin gets Trough you will be completely cut off. The Tyrells don't even need to do such measures, they can just gather their troops and march north on the Rosa Road unopposed with Lord Renly stuck here in the capital. He thought long and hard about the idea. Even if the Tyrells stayed neutral, the United Riverlands would be hard-pressed to hold Tywin Lannister. If they were fractured, they didn't stand a chance. The North would take weeks and months to gather its army and march south, so his troops wouldn't be of use in the early stages, like in the Dance of Dragons or the Rebellion. The Vale could probably march out much earlier, especially if a lord like Bronze Jon tried to rally them. Lysa Arryn would also oppose the Lannisters, as her letter to Winterfell had made sure. All in all, it wasn't a bad plan. In the end he agreed with the Lord of Runestone. Sir Robar was a good fighter and 18 of the Royce Guard still stayed here under his command, so that was the main thing. They said their goodbyes and Jon immediately left, bound on finding a ship this late that would take him out before the morning. He went to sleep so his leg could rest, because he would need it tomorrow. The only regret he had of the day, was that he had never spoken with Lord Renly. It had seemed like the king's youngest brother had been evading him, but he didn't know why. Maybe he still didn't trust him because of the way he had handled his finances. It didn't matter too much, as if all went to plan, they could talk tomorrow about the state of affairs and how to deal with his other brother before they proclaim him king. He got up early that morning and his whole household was put on high alert. Even cooks and servants were allowed a dagger and were commanded to stay inside. His whole guard gathered in and around the Tower of the Hand. Most of them staying inside to avoid detection, although some were training and drilling just outside so they had a presence in the yard when needed. The Stormlanders and Valyman also did the same, and their men either trained with his or waited in their quarters. He noticed that many Lannister men are also drilling in the yard and he cursed but went on with his plan. After that was done and the news that the king is dead is presented to him by Grand Maester Pycelle, and he asks him to convey a small council meeting in the Tower of the Hand. All the councillors arrive one by one except for Lord Renly. Varys tells him that Lord Renly has left the city with Sir Loras Tyrell and most of his retainers in the direction of Storm's End or Highgarden. The news hits him. Why did he leave? Is he scared? Does he wish to gather his troops in the Stormlands? Does he know about Joffrey? So many questions hit him. He shakes them off however, as he needs the council to accept him in the positions of regent and protector of the realm as soon as possible, as that would give him sufficient power until Lord Stannis and his fleet arrive. Sir Barristan reads the letter wherein he is called Lord Protector, but before anyone can proclaim him as such, Fat Tom arrives with the royal steward. Unsurprised, he nods to Fat Tom, who will initiate his plan. Men will be sent to the quarters of the Stormlanders and the Royces to come out in the yard and subdue the Lannister forces there, if necessary. He marches out of the tower and, escorted by 20 of his guardsmen, he joins the small council members towards the throne room. Both Sir Barristan and the Grand Maester look up and ask why needs such a big retinue, but he deflects their questions. Before the throne room he is joined by Sir Roland with his 5 retainers, as well as Lord Dondarrion, Thoros of Myr with 2 of their knights and 3 men at arms. At this Sabaristan looks alarmed, but he doesn't say anything. Sarobar and Alin will lead the troops in the yard when necessary, and all other men will gather there and on the walls. He, the council members and his group of over 30 armed men enter the throne room. He sees the boy Joffrey sit on the Iron Throne with Cersei beside him and his siblings and uncle in front of the throne. Before all of them stand the 4 remaining Kingsguard, with Sir Jaime and Sir Mandon away from the capital and Sabaristan next to him. Behind the throne room are some 20 Lannister guards, armed with long swords. They have crimson cloaks draped over their shoulders and steel lions that crested their helms. More importantly, he can see the walls are lined with gold cloaks. He estimates that around 100 of them are here, and it eases his mind. They outnumber the Lannister 6-1 with his men. His eye is drawn again to the throne. As Joffrey stands up and speaks, "I command the council to make all the arrangements necessary for my coronation," Cersei's son proclaimed. "I wish to be crowned within the fortnight. Today I shall accept the oaths of fealty from my loyal councillors." He took the letter from Robert out of his pocket. "Lord Varys, could you please show this to my Lady of Lannister?" After reading it and scoffing at its content, she ripped the paper in multiple pieces. The only one truly surprised at this was Sabaristan. Cersei demanded him to kneel, but he refused to do so. "Your son has no claim to the throne upon which he sits. Lord Stannis is Robert's true heir, as he has no legitimate children of his own." The boy king screamed at him for that, and even his siblings seemed to hesitate at that. Cersei followed up with a demand to Sabaristan, "Lord Commander, seize this traitor." Sabaristan seemed to hesitate, but suddenly he was surrounded by over 30 armed men, Northmen and Stormlanders alike. He saw the surprise with almost everyone in the room that the Stormlanders openly aligned themselves with him like this. For a second, he saw doubt enter the eye of Cersei Lannister, but it left as quick as it got there. It still managed to shut her up for a second though. The silence was soon disrupted when the Hound took out his longsword. The Knights of the Kingsguard and the Lannister men followed suit. "Kill them!" Joffrey screamed. "Kill them all, I command you to do so." "So be it, you leave me no choice," he said as he changed his gaze toward Janos Slynt. "Commander, take the Queen and her children into custody. Do not harm them, but put them under constant guard. The royal apartments will do nicely." "Men of the watch," the commander shouted, and all 100 spears were lowered and closed in. From the corner of his eye, he saw Littlefinger slither out of their group and move towards the Iron Throne. Before he could react upon it, he heard a cry from a few men next to him. His eyes went wide as he saw a Northman go down, pierced by a spear of a gold cloak. Sir Roland Storm immediately shouted, "We have been betrayed. To arms, men, follow me." He followed this up with a cut, opening the neck of one of the gold cloaks. Now all his men sprang into action as they cut at the men of the city watch. Soon he saw multiple of their men fall, ordinary watchmen no match for hardened knights and well-trained guards. For a moment, it even seemed as they would turn the tide. He saw Sir Roland kill several watchmen, one after the other. Lord Beric didn't do any worse either, and many of their combined guards fought admirably. Then he saw the Hound move in as he decapitated one of Lord Beric's men. He then cut off Varys' arm at the shoulder before finishing him off. The Lannister men and the Kingsguard moved in as well, with only Sabaristan standing to the side in confusion. The man had his sword drawn but didn't seem to know who to hit it with. He then heard Sir Roland's voice again. "Break out, men, towards the hallway. We need to get to the courtyard to reinforcements, follow me." As one, the Stormlanders switched towards the entrance. Some of his own men followed in clearing a path, while others tried to get him to safety. He saw the Hound being stopped by Thoros of Myr, who had set flames to his sword. Joffrey's shield backed away from it and Thoros took the time to slash at a scared watchman, cutting his throat. Still the Lannister men and Kingsguard marched towards them, although at a slower pace, steadily trying to defeat Thoros and his guards. The flames kept them at bay for now, except for some half-handed efforts. He knew it wouldn't last though, as watchmen kept coming at their sides. Suddenly he saw some of them back away, and as he looked towards the gate, he saw why. Sir Roland screamed at the watchman, as he stood at the head of their diminished group, the head of Janos Slynt in his left hand, a blooded sword in his right. This in combination with his pox-ridden face, made for a horrible sight. The hesitation of some of the watchmen was all they needed, and they tried to make their way towards the inner gates. His leg hurted like hell though, and he kept going slower and slower. Thoros managed to keep most of the Lannisters at bay, as he swung wildly with his flaming sword whilst walking backwards, but some had circled between the watchmen and came at their left with Sir Preston Greenfield and Sir Boros Blount from the King's Guard at their head. He saw Fat Tom and Kine move towards them to stop them, but they were cut down one by one. He saw a Lannister knight go down with them, but it didn't matter, they were losing ground quickly. He tried to run faster, but he couldn't. It took all the strength of his upper body to rest on the cane and Donis' shoulder without falling. Donis dragged him forward as Desmond fought off a Lannister man-at-arms with his longsword. He saw how they almost made it to the gates, and he started to hope they would make it. Mere seconds later, his hopes fell with him, as Donis was pushed to the ground by a watchman. He fell on his left shoulder and couldn't get up. He let go of the cane and took out a dagger, stabbing in the foot of a Lannister guard that had made it close to him. He saw Desmond hack the man down. At the same time, Porther came to Donis' help and they managed to cut the watchman, that had tackled the latter, down together, but afterwards were engaged by the two knights of the King's Guard. He looked around him and saw that most of his guard was dead by this point. Thoros on his own held off two King's Guard and multiple Lannisters, but he was failing. He saw another man of his guard fall down and realized they were it, as they were now cut off from the group under Sir Roland by multiple gold cloaks and Lannister men. He saw a gold cloak move towards Desmond unprotected back, as he cut down another Lannister guard. He threw his dagger and managed to hit the man in the arm and stopping his attack. Desmond turned around and finished the man off, but it was all for nothing. As at the same time, he saw Donis and Porther be cut down by the King's Guard. Thoros, who stood next to him at this point, also got wounded by the spear of a watchman. The two fighters stood over him but were quickly surrounded by the four King's Guard and the Hound, who returned to the fight to face Desmond. In a matter of seconds both Desmond and Thoros were cut down and he saw their lifeless bodies hit the floor next to him, as he lay helpless on the ground. Soon he was surrounded by the King's Guard himself, multiple swords aimed at his throat. "Stop, leave him alive. We might need him still." He suddenly heard, looking towards the sound, he saw the small stature of Tyrion Lannister speak up. The King's Guard looked towards Cersei Lannister and she nodded. Subsequently, he was dragged up by two watchmen, unable to do anything. He suddenly heard the boy King laugh with glee. "If we can't kill him, we can at least make him watch all his friends be killed. Bring him to the courtyard." Suddenly over 50 guardsmen and half the remaining Lannisters and King's Guard marched outside the hall as he was carried with them. He saw how 6 Lannister men and Sir Barristan, Sir Oris and Sir Meryn of the King's Guard stayed with the royal family. As Joffrey, flanked by the Hound, screamed at his troops to kill all the Stark and Dondarrion men in the courtyard. He finally came upon the courtyard. There he saw Sir Robar in the midst of Vale and Northmen cutting away at Lannisters in front of the Tower of the Hand. Next to him stood, to his surprise, Lord Beric and Sir Roland. Both of them had made it out alive, but he saw both were wounded and not many of their accompanying number remained. He was also worried, as he didn't see Alyn anywhere. As he looked around the courtyard, he saw fighting had broken out everywhere along the walls and in the courtyard. He saw a great pile of red bodies, as it seemed most of the drilling Lannister troops had been cut down. His men were surrounded by a sea of watchmen however, and he saw how the additional reinforcements coming out of the castle made the fight even more unfair. His men and allies fought valiantly however, and at closer look he saw how even some of the northern servants had joined in the fighting, armed with daggers or weapons they had picked up from fallen enemies. The boy King stood next to him. "Do you see your friends die, traitor? I will do the same to your annoying sons before taking Sansa as my wife. Or maybe I could just take her as a mistress, who knows?" The boy laughed. He just looked upon him, before looking back at the small battle taking place down below. All the while, he silently thanked the old gods for the foresight he had received and had made send his daughter away. That boy would never be able to do anything to her now that she was in the north. With the addition of the extra men, he saw how his friends were cleared of the walls. Soon, he heard screams come out of the quarters house Dondarrion, Caron and Royce had stayed in. This seemed to make the remaining men down the Tower of the Hand even more determined. He saw them cut down watchman after watchman, but for every one that fell 3 took their place. Then he saw the Hound and Sir Preston reach the group with the remaining Lannister guards and knights. He saw how the men fought valiantly and how multiple Lannisters went down, but soon Sir Roland fell in battle with the Hound. Sir Robar cut down Sir Preston in an excellent show of swordsmanship, but Lord Beric was soon captured as well. He saw how Sir Robar and a handful of men were left. In an excellent feat of skill, Sir Robar managed to keep his opponents at bay for long enough for the men to run into the tower and for him to follow suit. He saw dozens and dozens of watchmen follow inside under the leadership of the Hound. 10 minutes later they came out, the Hound throwing the body of Sir Robar on the sand, as he saw some of his servants be thrown out of the windows. Then Cersei Lannister walked up to him from inside the castle. "You didn't really think that I wouldn't have my spies inside the city watch, did you? I just offered them more than you did, and thanks to you I don't even need to give anything to that Janos Slynt. It all worked out in the end," she said with a smile. "You can also thank Littlefinger for that, he orchestrated it for me. It wasn't smart of you to make so many enemies here." She then pointed to a few Lannister men. "Get him to the dungeons, throw him in a black cell." He was then carried again, and soon he was thrown in a dark and damp room. He laid there alone and in the dark, with nothing but the memories of his dead friends to keep him company. Chapter 17, Planning for a War. 298 AC. Bran. He had been at Riverrun for over 4 months now. "I love it here," he thought once more when he looked outside his window at the Tumblestone first thing in the morning. He put on his clothes quickly before running into the courtyard. His friends had already gathered there, minutes before. His best friend first and foremost was Alan Blackwood, the 5th son of Lord Tytos. In one of their first lessons they had learned that they were some very distant cousins, as apparently his great-great-grandmother Melantha had been a Blackwood. This drew them together, and now they did almost everything together. Next up you had Lyman D'Arry, the heir to House D'Arry. Just like Alan, he was of the same age as him. Lyman was really funny and knew a lot about Riverlander history, which was interesting. Last, but not least, you had Miles Mouton, second-born son of Lord William Mouton and named after his famous uncle. Miles was 1 year older than them, but as he was somewhat timid that didn't show too much. They had a lot of fun together. Every morning they went out to train together under the watchful eye of Sir Desmond Grill. All 4 of them were making steady progress, and they were all around the same skill level, so that made for some pretty interesting sparring matches every day. Afterwards they normally broke their fast and went to their first lesson with Maester Vimen together. This could be about a number of topics, like economics or house sigils, but he liked history and stories the most. Then they would normally have their midday meal with the Tully family, after which they had a few hours free before their second lesson. He had less free time than the other boys, as his uncle Sir Brynden or sometimes his grandfather Hoster made time for him each day to talk to him and teach him additional things. He loved Sir Brynden and, although he was quite weak and spent all of his days in his bed now, he liked his grandfather as well. His uncle Edmure was very busy being groomed by both of them, so they spent less time together, but he was also always nice to him. He looked upon his friends, and Sir Desmond gestured for him to pick up a wooden sword and spar with Lyman, and so he did. Sir Desmond had been telling him to swing harder for months when he arrived, but only after he had gotten the news of his father's injury and Jory's death had he gotten it right. Every swing he took, he tried to add a little bit of the anger he felt about it in it. Not too much, as not to swing wildly, but just that little edge. Sir Desmond seemed pleased with his progress at least, and his father had written him a letter over a week ago that he was fine and recovering. So, he didn't have to worry so much now. It still sucked, and he often thought of his family. His mother had promised to visit with his sisters after a year, but that didn't seem likely now. His father's situation in King's Landing, and Sansa going north, would make it so they would be less likely to come south anytime soon. Luckily, he still had family here. His uncles and grandfather were here to take care of him. Besides, Alan was also a little bit family, wasn't he? He also wrote a lot of letters to his siblings everywhere, even John, so that made him miss them less. He was so caught up in his own thoughts that he didn't see Lyman's next swing in time, and it caught him right on the left arm. He hissed in pain, as the blow would leave a nasty bruise. "Brandon Stark, you stop dreaming now. Dreaming in a fight gets you killed, do you understand?" Sir Desmond shouted. He nodded apologetically. Yes, Sir Desmond. The man looked him sternly in the eye, before looking at this arm. It isn't too bad, but go to the maester anyway. He can put an ointment on it, to soften the pain, he said. It won't take all of it away, but let the remainder of the pain be a memory of why you shouldn't dream when fighting. He nodded profusely and ran up towards the maester's turret. He ran up the dozens of stairs before halting when he came to the door. The door wasn't quite shut, and he could hear voices inside. His curiosity got the better of him and he listened a little before entering. This is grave news, Vimen. We'll have to prepare for war. Prepare for the messages to call the banners to be written, but don't send them yet. I'll talk with Hoster and Edmure first, but this is our only logical way of acting. He heard a voice say, concern audible in his voice. He recognized the voice as his uncle Bryndon and was surprised, as the man always seemed so calm and collected before. War, Sir Bryndon. Is there no other way? Are you sure? Another voice asked with shock. He also recognizes this one, it belongs to Maester Vimen. Yes Maester, I'm sure. First, they attack my niece's husband and now they capture him for treason, while they crown their puppet on the throne. The Lannisters have gone too far this time. Multiple good knights and lords have been killed or captured in this plot. The Lannisters won't stop now, and I know my nephew Rob and his bannermen will never stand for this. House Tully cannot stand idle while the Lannisters attack our kin, his uncle said with determination. In shock he realized they were talking about Rob and his father. That must mean his father was captured, but how? Why? Treason. What is this? Without thinking he stormed into the room. What happened to my father? He demanded to know. Both men looked at him in surprise and his uncle had his hand up his blade in a split second. The moment their eyes met, he saw his uncle soften. He loosened his hand from his sword and went to one knee, just in front of him. Bran, there has been grave news from King's Landing. The king is dead. Apparently, your father, or so the Lannisters tell, rebelled against his son Joffrey and he has been captured together with Lords Dondarrion and Dane. It seems Sir Roland Storm and Sir Robar Royce were also involved somehow. Whatever the case, your father has been captured and the Lannisters are demanding my brother and his son to go to Riverrun and pay homage to the new King Joffrey. His uncle said, trying to honestly explain the situation. He looked at his uncle in shock. Who are those men? The Danes are from Dorne, but I have never heard of Dondarrion or Sir Roland. And Sir Robar Royce. I knew a Waymar Royce once. He went to the Night's Watch and was accompanied by his father Bronze Enyon. I don't know Robar. Who is he? Who are they? What happened? He started to stammer. He felt totally confused and didn't know what was happening and it scared him. Before he could say more, his uncle grabbed him and pulled him in a hug. Shush now Bran, I'll tell you everything you want to know, and more, but you have to calm down first. After a few moments he gathered his thoughts and pulled back a little. He still felt his uncle's hand on his shoulders as he looked into the Tully eyes, that were so like his own. He nodded timidly at his uncle and the man understood his cue to explain. Lord Dondarrion is a lord from the Marches in the Stormlands. Sir Roland Storm is the bastard brother of another Marcher lord, Lord Bryce Caron. They were both good and honourable men that were very loyal to King Robert. I am quite sure the Lannisters are trying to eliminate King Robert's loyal followers, so they can control his son's rule. He started to explain. I don't know why Lord Dane was there, but considering he should be a boy, it could be for a whole lot of reasons. Sir Robar Royce was the second son of Lord Yon Royce, Bronze Enyon as you call him. He was the elder brother of Sir Waymar, who you've seen on his way to the Night's Watch last year. As for what happened, as I've said, I think the Lannisters are trying to eliminate the former king's supporters, now that he's dead. Died of a hunting accident apparently. Who knows the truth of that? His uncle scoffed. The most important thing is that your father has been captured and is being held in King's Landing. I know for a fact your brother and your father's bannermen will not stand for this. So, it's quite likely that, if the Lannisters don't let go of your father, we will have a war. I don't know what you heard, but I was discussing House Tully's side in the war. Sir Bryndon finished. And what of House Tully's side of the war? He asked, scared that they wouldn't help his brother and his father. His uncle looked at him piercingly, before saying what are House Tully's words, Bran. Without thinking he immediately responded family, duty, honor. His uncle smiled at his enthusiasm and responded seriously. There you have your answer, Bran. Your brother and father are family. Besides that, they are our allies and so it's our duty to assist them, we are honor bound to do so. So, you will fight to get my father back, he asked hopefully. I personally will, yes. Nothing and no one can keep me from doing so. However, I will need to convince my brother and nephew first before the whole might of House Tully will join. My brother and his son love your mother though, so I wouldn't worry much about it. He smiled. Okay. He smiled thinking, that with a famous knight like Sir Brynden and all the troops of the Riverlands, they could never lose. Now it's my time to ask questions, Bran. Why are you here? The Blackfish asked him sternly. Sir Desmond sent me towards the Maester to take a look at a nasty bruise I got in training. I heard you talk when I was at the door and so I listened a little before storming in. He admitted, as he looked at his feet. Sir Brynden put his right index finger under his chin and gently lifted his head until their eyes met. I was going to tell you all of this anyway, Bran. You don't have to eavesdrop, it's not a good trait. People don't appreciate it. I know, I'm sorry. He said as he looked down again. Now come here, nephew. You look like you could use a hug. His uncle said as he was caught in a big hug. The hug felt really nice and he put his head on his uncle's shoulder. It was almost as nice as the ones Rob or his father gave him back home. They stayed like that for a few moments, before his uncle slowly pulled away. Now you'll have to excuse me, nephew. I have to talk to my other nephew and convince him of his damn duty to help your brother. He said with a smile as he winked at him. He smiled back and nodded at him. Maester Vimen, I propose that you first take a look at young Bran here, before going to work on what I asked you. Edmure and I will be here soon, I imagine. The Maester nodded and called him over to look at his arm. It had been a few days since all the ravens had flown out. Sir Brynden had explained that most were on their way towards their bannermen, to call them to arms. Others were sent to the Eyrie and to Winterfell, asking them for assistance and promising them to stand together against the Lannisters. Already rumors were going around the castle that the Lannisters were amassing an army behind the Golden Tooth. He didn't know if they were true, but it seemed really quick if it was. He decided to clear his mind and go climb a little. He started to climb the sandstone walls at the keep. By now, he knew them almost as well as he did those of Winterfell. He knew that on his way to the top, he would have to climb past the Lord Solar and would eventually reach the top of the keep. From there, he could climb up and take the stairs down. The faces of the guards on top were really funny to see as he climbed up, out of nowhere. After climbing for about 10 minutes, he reached the balcony of the Lord Solar. He decided to hold on to the beams of the balcony, to catch his breath before continuing. That was when he heard voices. It seemed like both his uncles were having an argument. You can't leave Houses Piper and Vance to defend the pass alone, they'll be slaughtered, his uncle Brynden shouted out. I trust Mark and Kael and their fathers to defend the pass from the Lannisters, uncle. They are capable and valiant. They won't let us down, his uncle Edmure responded. Oh, Edmure. I never doubted their abilities. Clement Piper and Lord Vance are good men and capable soldiers, they just don't have the men. Together they can raise 400 to 500 men at most and that will take some time. What are they going to do if the Lannisters spill from the Tooth with 10,000 men? Or 20,000? They won't stand a chance, no matter how valiant they fight. Sir Brynden called out. At this, he decided to look inside the Solar. He placed his left foot on the support corbel of the balcony and swung his body around, so he could easily hold himself on the nicely worked stone railing, decorated with fishes. From here on out, he had a good view of a part of the Solar and he saw a few men standing around a table with maps on it. Do you really think the Lannisters could field so much troops, so quick? His uncle Edmure asked, clearly surprised. It is possible. I wouldn't put it past Tywin to have been quietly amassing troops since he got word of the Kingslayer's flight. If he started raising his levy then, he could have easily amassed and armed thousands of men already. If you count on the fact that they are still not making any signs of marching out, this could swell a lot more in the coming weeks. So, by the time Lords Vance and Piper are ready, I think it is safe to say the Lannisters will have over 30,000 men ready. Sir Brynden replied. They were talking about the war and the troop movements of the armies, he realized. It seems the rumors in the castle were right. You think they will be coming down from the Golden Tooth with 30,000 men? Edmure asked, shock all over his face. No, I think they will make a two-pronged attack. One from the Golden Tooth and one from the Gold Road, at least that's what I would do. So maybe half of that would be coming down from there. The famous Blackfish answered, and he started to realize how he got his reputation. His uncle was telling horrible truths but stayed calm and collected under all of it. He wanted to know more and so he moved forward a little, but that was a big mistake. The movement made him slip a little on the smooth sandstone. He collected himself easily, years of experience climbing had taught him a lot. The only problem was that he had had to make a big movement to keep his balance, a movement that hadn't gone unnoticed. It seems we have a visitor, Sir Brynden said, and with those words he felt all of his breath leave his body. A mere second later his uncle was towering above him. Do you need a hand, Bran? He swallowed deeply and nodded while taking the man's hand and climbing on the balcony. As he walked into the room, he saw his uncle Edmure, Sir Desmond and Sir Robin Roger standing around the table. All looked at him in shock, all except for his uncle Brynden next to him. How did Bran get here? Edmure asked Sir Brynden. He climbed up here, I suppose. He was holding onto the balcony while listening in on our conversation. The Blackfish answered matter-of-factly, with a small smirk on his face. Climbed. But we are over 40 feet high. You can't climb that, Sir Robin said, and the other two men easily agreed. Oh, this boy can. His mother told me all about it. His uncle sniggered. When I was in Winterfell, I once stopped him from climbing a tower that was twice as high as the keep here. I think he can manage this. You knew that I was planning to go climbing back then, he asked, surprised, not being able to keep his mouth shut. At this the whole room looked at him. Well, I had a pretty good idea and you just confirmed it, young Brandon. Sir Brynden laughed aloud. I suppose, you have done this more than once already? Sir Robin Roger suddenly asked. He nodded, a little ashamed, as he looked at his feet. The man scoffed, well, that explains those weird briefings with the guards on top of the keep lately. Anyway, I think we should go back to business. Bran here is completely unhurt, except for maybe his pride that he was caught. So, I think that we don't need to keep going over this, we have a water plan. His Blackfish uncle said. All the men in the room nodded, but Uncle Edmure kept looking at him very suspiciously. I have a request for you all, men. His uncle Brynden continued. I would like Bran to be able to stay here and learn from these discussions. He has heard the majority of this conversation already, I think. This way we can make him promise to not tell the whole castle. Edmure looked shocked. Uncle, the boy is 8 years old, you can't be serious. I am, that boy is the son of Eddard Stark, one of the best generals I've seen in my lifetime. Besides that, he is also the grandson of your father who isn't so bad either. I'll think he'll get the hang of it quickly. The man said, as he suddenly looked at him whilst saying those last words. He beamed inside with pride but managed to keep his mouth shut for now. He still looked up to his uncle with a smile, the man looked down and smiled back. Still, uncle. The boy is far too young. He might not even understand everything. Edmure argued. Sir Brynden looked at him then. Bran, I want you to tell us everything you heard from us, hanging from the balcony. Tell it in your own words, so we know you understand it. He looked questioningly at his uncle, afraid to do something wrong. Go on, the man replied as he gave him a nudge on the shoulder. He looked across the room and said, well, the Lannisters are amassing their troops and you were discussing how to stop them. Uncle Edmure wants to order Lord Vance and Lord Piper to hold the pass from the Golden Tooth, but Uncle Brynden doesn't like the idea very much. Uncle Brynden then told that he expects the Lannisters to have a lot more troops than Uncle Edmure expected and that's why he thinks the plan is bad. 30,000 by the time they attack, or something. He said, as the men around him looked at him in shock. Oh, and Uncle Brynden also thinks the Lannisters will attack from the Gold Road and the Golden Tooth, not just the latter only. Maester Vireman has taught me the maps of the Riverlands, so I know where those are. With this he walked over to the map and pointed his finger at the tooth and then the Gold Road. Ha ha ha, his Uncle Brynden roared with laughter. He showed you, nephew, he said as he put his hand on Uncle Edmure's shoulder. The latter was still looking at him, a mixture of shock and amusement on his face. Finally, he said, all right, we'll let him stay. He has to swear to not say a word to anyone, however. He'll also have to stay quiet. We can't have him interrupt this constantly. At this his uncle nodded, and so he swore on his family that he would never tell anyone. He stood next to Sir Brynden, as the man put a hand on his shoulder. He didn't look at him though, as the discussion started once more. You expect the Lannisters to do something from the Gold Road? Edmure asked Sir Brynden. Yes, I would do it like that. We are going to amass our strength here at Riverrun, he said as he pointed to the castle on the map. He knows that, and it makes the whole of the Riverlands vulnerable from here at the Mummers Ford, he said as he pointed to some point between Stony September and Pink Maiden. To here, he said as his finger moved towards Harrenhal. What can we do about it? Uncle Edmure asked. Not much, except for letting all those lords man their castles themselves. However, that would mean that we wouldn't have enough levies to defend against the attack coming from the Tooth though, so they would just pick us off one by one. Sir Desmond Grull replied. So, we'll just give up on Pink Maiden, Stony September, Wayfarer's Rest, Stonehenge and Harrenhal now. You can't be serious, his Uncle Edmure exclaimed. No, we don't. Not really, at least. Pink Maiden and Wayfarer's Rest will need to be given up temporarily. If we can hold the army from the Tooth here at Riverrun, we can turn it around and march on the second one and protect the other castles. In any case, Harrenhal can't fall. It would mean that Casterly Rock and King's Landing are connected, and we can't let that happen. Sir Brynden responded. Edmure nodded at that. You are sure the Pipers and Vances won't be able to hold the Lannisters for a time, while we amass more forces here? Absolutely positive. The Blackfish responded. Okay, then we'll do it your way for now. We'll pull back the Pipers and the Vances towards here. We'll give them the opportunity to save their families and household and bring them with them, if they want. All the other lords will amass here in Riverrun as planned, and we'll defeat the Lannisters here when they arrive. Edmure said. As the heir, he acted instead of Grandfather Hoster, he knew. His grandfather was too weak to attend the meeting, and so Edmure took it upon himself to lead. I will also call upon Stony September to double its guards. That way the Lannisters may not want to siege the city and we can spare the people from the war. This will be all for today, I will call upon you when I know more. Edmure said. Sir Desmond and Sir Robin left, and just as he was about to leave with Sir Brynden, his Uncle Edmure called out to him. Bran. Yes, Uncle, he asked. Not a word to anyone, understood? He nodded heavily and left the room. 4 weeks later. He was sitting silently on the top of the keep with Alyn and Liman. They looked on the fields to the south and west of Riverrun. Where once there had been grassy plains or fields of wheat, now there was an army. Rows of tents were scattered all over the fields, and banners in many different colors flew from them. The army in question grew larger every day now. Over 10,000 men had gathered beneath the walls of Riverrun. These were the troops of Houses Tully, Piper, Roger, the two Vances and Blackwood and Bracken. From House Tully new levies were arriving and being armed every day still, but it had slowed down to only a dozen men a day now. The big arrivals of troops now came only from their bannermen, big and small. Many more would be arriving in the next month. Sir Brynden had told him that House Tully, in contrast to House Stark, wasn't the strongest house in its region. The Blackwoods, Brackens, Mallisters and Freys all had much bigger levies than the Tullys. The latter two still hadn't arrived, but the first two had around similar strength of that of the Tully Levi in the field, maybe a little more. When he pointed that out to his uncle, the men had scoffed that they left too many men at home to protect their keeps and livestock. Apparently, all the lords had done so, as the Vances of Wayfarer's Rest and Pipers didn't bring anything close to the 4,500 men like Sir Brynden had said. He guessed it was just over half of that. Sir Brynden explained that it was a common thing in the history of the Riverlands. None of the lords trusted each other good enough to gather full levies. Besides that, the Riverlands had seen a lot of fighting in Robert's rebellion and the population hadn't completely recovered yet in some parts. It had been fun meeting Alan's father, Lord Titus. He was very kind towards him and even arranged for him join them in prayer a few days ago. Lord Titus had arrived with his second son Lucas, Alan's elder brother. Alan had explained that his eldest brother Sir Brynden was governing Raventree Hall, while his brother Hoster wasn't much of a fighter. The others, like Alan, were too young to fight. Only one of his sons accompanied Lord Titus, but that didn't mean there wasn't an abundance of Blackwoods in Riverrun now. Alan's father came with his 2 brothers, one of his nephews and 4 of his cousins and even some of their sons. It had been really nice to see Alan's big family, and he had felt a little stronger as all of them had gathered under the slender weirwood tree of Riverrun. Lord Titus had talked to him about his father, said they were friends from the rebellion. When he had sheepishly pointed out that they were very distant kin, through his father's great-grandmother, the man had laughed and slapped him softly on the shoulder. He said that it was a true honor to be counted as kin by a Stark. He had gone on that he was happy his son had such a good friend, and that if he were to ever want for something after the war, that a son of Eddard Stark and a grandson of Hoster Tully would always be welcome in his home. Lyman's father hadn't arrived yet. Sir Raymond D'Ari had by sheer chance escaped the fate of his father, as he had left King's Landing a few days prior to the capture. As such, he had been on the road when the Ravens with the news and the question to gather his forces had come. As such, the D'Aris were slow to rally their forces and were expected to only arrive in a few weeks. It wouldn't make much of a difference, Lyman had stated sadly. The D'Aris had lost half their land, all their wealth and most of their power after the rebellion. Their remaining lands had been severely damaged by the Tullys and hadn't fully recovered yet. Because of these reasons, the D'Aris would only be able to rally a few hundred men from their own lands and would have no money to hire additional sellswords or freeriders. Lyman had said that his house would recover, given time. If their lands healed, they would be able to muster over 1,000 men again. In addition, the lands they had left were fertile. They would replenish their coffers again in time. Sir Raymond had been busy doing so for over a decade now. He had told his son that if they continued their current course of action, their house's power would be restored at the latest when Lyman became a father of his own. Lyman had come here to mend the rift between House D'Ari and House Tully, and he had secretly told him that his father hoped that a small portion of their lands could be returned to them through his stay here. Sir Raymond wouldn't only come with less Levi. He would also come without the big family the Blackwoods had. Sir Raymond's brothers had all died in the Battle of the Trident. Of the male line, only Lyman and his father remained. They do have multiple free cousins through the female line, but Lyman thinks little of them. His thoughts on the houses of his 2 friends were interrupted by the sound of a lot of men entering the courtyard out of the keep. To his surprise, he saw his uncle Brynden shout at all the men around him to saddle up and gather others. He looked at his friends, looked down again, and without saying a word he rushed down the stairs of the keep. When he arrived in the courtyard, he saw his uncle run towards the stables and he followed him immediately. In the stables he finally caught up to him, as he was saddling his horse. A beautiful black destrier, that served to augment his status as Blackfish, he knew. "Uncle, where are you going?" he called, out of breath from his race down the stairs and over the courtyard. "Bran, I didn't expect to see you here. Why are you so out of breath?" Sir Brynden asked with a weird look on his face. "I was looking at the army with Alan and Lyman, and I saw you preparing to leave, so I rushed down," he panted. A small smile came to the man's face as he kneeled down to his height. "Shush, catch your breath first," he said. A few moments later, he asked him, "Are you good?" and he nodded in reply. "A lot of news has come in today. Lord Tywine has apparently come up from the Gold Road with 20,000 troops 2 days ago. He is planning to march into the belly of the Riverlands unopposed. At the same time, Jaime Lannister has come down from the Golden Tooth with 15,000 men unopposed and is storming towards here at high speed. He had apparently scouted the area well and knew what to expect." His uncle started to explain, intensely looking at him if he understood. "They will be here in a few days. In the meantime, Edmure has refused me command of the forces, saying he wants to lead the forces himself to show the Riverlords he is a worthy heir to Hoster as he defeats the Kingslayer. Utter madness, if you ask me. The Lannisters outnumber us 3-2 and they have prepared and drilled a lot longer than we have. Subsequently, he refused me command of any other meaningful position and refuses to decide on a good plan to hinder Lord Tywin's march. The only good command he offered was to give Lord Tytos the rearguard, but all the other commands he gave to his inexperienced friends. He continued. He keeps insisting that a lot more of our bannermen like the Mallisters, Freys, Leicesters, Smallwoods, Dearies and others will be here on time for the battle. If all of them do, even with the reduced numbers they always bring, we would outnumber the Lannisters. The thing is that half of those lords, like the Freys, Leicesters and Dearies haven't left their keeps yet. So, it is utter folly. His uncle explained, anger and emotion clear in his voice. Shock hit him, as he heard Sir Brynden speak like that. He had never seen the man rave like that, and it was clear that he was concerned about Uncle Edmure and the war. So, what are you going to do, uncle? He asked scared. There is nothing for me to do here. Edmure won't listen to me and he refused me any position in which I can have an influence on the battle. I have asked Edmure permission to gather 600 riders from our own house and House Bracken so I can harass Lord Tywin's supply lines. He has allowed me only 500, but it'll do. Sir Brynden said with sadness in his voice. I'll hit their supply convoys, attack their column at night and destroy the garrisons they leave behind in conquered castles. I plan to slow Lord Tywin's march as much as I can until your father's army arrives here. We have had word from your brother, he has called the banners and plans to march soon. We have already sent a raven today with the news that the fighting will soon begin. I plan to join your countrymen when they enter the Riverlands. It'll be weeks before that happens though, so I know what to do until then. He said, some form of fighting spirit returning to his voice. He didn't like that his uncle was leaving. His grandfather slept more and more now and Uncle Edmure was, although kind, always busy. Uncle Brynden was the only one that regularly spent time with, except for his friends. Can I come with you? He asked pleadingly, not wanting to see his idol leave. His uncle smiled sadly at him. No, Bran, you cannot. You are still too small. If there is another war in a few years, and I really hope there won't be one, you can accompany me as my squire or as a knight. Now you need to stay here and listen to Hoster and Edmure. Do you understand? He nodded sadly and subsequently tackled his uncle to the ground with a huge hug. At this the man laughed and hugged him back. After a while he stood up and pulled him to his feet. He climbed on his horse and rode into the courtyard. Looking around and seeing that all the men that were in the keep were waiting, he turned his horse once more towards him. Family, duty and honor, Bran. Never forget it. Even if winter has come, it's still family first, then duty and lastly honor. With this he turned his horse and spurred it through the gates. 36 riders following him. He ran up on the castle walls and looked as the group of riders made its way towards the army. He stood there, silently watching, until he saw a much larger group of horsemen leave the encampment an hour later. He followed the group with his eyes for a long time, until they were almost out of sight. He then left the battlements and walked across the courtyard back to the keep. He went towards the great hall to eat and saw it filled with men, but he knew none of them. He looked around, and although he was surrounded by dozens of people, he had never felt so alone. Chapter 18, Call the Banners. 298 AC. Robb. Osric, Torrhen and himself read the letter again and again. This couldn't be true. His father captured for treason. No way that was true. Torrhen looked at him with a sad expression on his face. I'm sorry Robb, but you know what you have to do. He looked into his friend's eyes and nodded solemnly. His mother and Maester Lewin turned their heads towards them. What do you mean Torrhen? What are you talking about? His mother demanded to know, while Lewin shook his head meaningfully next to her. He clearly understood what they were talking about. He looked at his mother, sighed and said I have to call the banners, mother. We have to get father back. His mother looked at him in shock, followed by anger. No way, Robb, you are not sending men south. We wait until we hear from your father and then we look what we'll do. Torrhen spoke up at that. My lady, you can't be serious. If Robb doesn't call the banners now, no northern lord will ever respect him. It doesn't matter if he becomes the Lord of Winterfell tomorrow or in 40 years, no lord will follow the craven Stark that didn't even raise troops to save his own father. At this, his mother looked taken aback, before becoming angry once more. Torrhen Karstark. How dare you say such a thing? I should have you thrown out of Winterfell by evening for daring to say such things about your future lord. He's right, mother. He said calmly. What? What are you saying, Robb? She said bewildered. I know these men. Their sons are my friends. Not one of them will ever follow me if we let father rot in King's Landing. Nor would I want them to. Just like none would have followed father had he not raised his banners against the Targaryens when his sister was kidnapped, and his father and brother killed. This needs to be done and it needs to be done now. He answered her. He turned towards Maester Lewin. Maester, prepare the messages, the ravens fly within the hour. Robb Stark, you will not call the banners without mine or your father's authority. You cannot call them in his name without my permission, she shouted. That's okay, I won't, he stated matter-of-factly. What? She asked in complete surprise. If you don't allow me to call the northern banners in name of House Stark, I will ask for their help in my personal name. In the name of Robb Stark, heir to Winterfell, as a plea to defend my father and the North's honor. Some lords will come, others will not, but I will march south. He said to his mother. He knew he would never be able to do anything of meaning in the Riverlands without the full force of the North. However, that doesn't matter. All that mattered is that he would be able to convince her, so she allows him to raise the banners. You would go yourself. Robb, you are a boy, nothing more. Let war over to the men. His mother almost screamed. Of course, I will go. If I called for the banners and Torrhen and Osric were in Carhold, they would also go. It's my duty to do so. I'm the eldest male Stark here and the heir to Winterfell. I must march, he said, not accepting anything less. Lord Robb, that wouldn't be prudent. It would be entirely possible to let Lord Umber, Bolton or Karstark lead the forces, if they were to be raised at all. Maester Lewin said. No, Maester. You know the North. I must do this myself. Not even Lord Rickard would respect me if I didn't go myself, and the man loves me like a son. Tell me I'm wrong. The Maester looked him in the eye, sighed and remained silent. What is this? Of course, those men will respect you when you're older. Your boy now, Robb. Do you really think men like the Great Jon will follow a boy? His mother cried out. No, they won't follow a boy. He stated simply. They will follow a Stark, though. At this he saw Os and Tom nod to him. We would. My father, brothers and I, we would. The Hornwoods, Marndaelis, Sowins, Mormonts, all would march, even men like the Great Jon. If the Stark calls, the North answers. His best friend said. She looked at him in shock. After taking a hold of herself, his mother replied. He isn't the Stark. She said the words with a kind of sarcasm. His father is, he is a boy. No, my lady. Lord Eddard is the head of House Stark and we all owe him our allegiance, but he is incapable of being the acting lord right now. Robb is the Stark in Winterfell now, and it's his job to defend both Winterfell and the North's interests. Its biggest interest now is to free its liege lord, and so we must. All of us. He replied. At this, his mother paled. She looked around to Maester Lewin for help, but he looked resigned. Lewin, you can't agree with this. I am afraid, I do. I don't like it, but I have to. Lord Eddard has spent a lot of time these last few years restoring House Stark's status with its bannermen. Robb is in the center of those plans, with his betrothal and fostering to a strong northern house like the Karstarks. More than that, also his friendship with the Umber, Nuri and Sowyn heirs. His sister's fostering, Arya's friendships, everything led up to this. If Robb doesn't do this, House Stark will lose all of these gains and more. The Maester replied, and he suddenly looked 10 years older. Besides that, father has been preparing me for it for months and years now. He has also been preparing the North for war. Sending archers to Moat Cailin, telling the lords to be ready. I will show you all my letters, in all of them are lessons about strategy, warfare and diplomacy. He even asked Lord Rickard and Maester Lewin to pay special attention to it in my education. Father never wanted for me to go to war, but he knew it might be necessary someday and prepared me accordingly. Well, that day has come early," he added in explanation. At this his mother seemed to resign herself. "Do what you have to, I will sign them," she said sadly to the maester, and her voice sounded hollow or distant. "No, mother. I will sign them. I am the Stark in Winterfell and father's heir. It must come from me," he said. She looked at him pleadingly for a few seconds, but he didn't respond. In response, she finally nodded before leaving the room. "Maester, the ravens fly within the hour," he repeated. Lewin nodded sadly and went to work. Torren came to him and put his arm on his shoulder. "You did well, Rob, my father would be proud." "I know, Tor, I just hope my father would be too." Over a month later, the Karstarks had finally arrived. That made sure all his troops that would go to Winterfell were here. Others would be joining them around the King's Road or Moat Cailin, but this was all for now. He welcomed his foster father at the gates and was surprised to see Alis riding behind him with her brothers. "Lord Rickard, it is good to see you," he said honestly. He hoped the men could help him with some of the lords gathered inside. "It's good to see you too, Rob," the man said as he jumped off his horse and gave him a hug. Afterwards, Harry and Ed did the same. Now he was face to face with Alis. They smiled awkwardly at each other for a few seconds until Ed cried out, "Oh, for the gods' sake. Give that a girl a hug already, Redstock. She's been dying to get one this whole trip, and let me remind you, the trip takes weeks." He sent daggers at Ed with his eyes, but when he turned back to Alis he saw her smile awkwardly and it was enchanting. As such, he gave her a hug at last. Talking together all of them they walked into the keep. He gave Tor and Os the duty to show their kinsmen to their rooms, while he had guards show their captains where to set up the tents for the army. That left him and Lord Rickard alone. "Has there been any trouble with the lords?" the man asked. "No, not really. They all tried to test me, as you warned for in your letter, but most of it was harmless. The only one that made a spectacle was the Great Jon. He demanded a change in the marching order and was pretty loud about it. However, a combination of Tor, Os, his son Smalljon and Grey Wind shut him up. At a moment it had seemed like he would pull out steel, but Smalljon slowed him down. When Grey Wind jumped on the table growling, followed by my siblings' wolves coming into the room from all sides, it made him sit down. He explained, thinking on how the giant man had been cowed by their wolves. Good Lord Rickard smiled. "If you get the Great Jon to sit down and listen, the others will follow suit." He was pleased with his mentor's words, but something was bothering him. He looked at the man for a few seconds before finally asking, "Why have you taken Alis with you?" The man looked him straight in the eyes. "Men die in war, Rob. I wanted you two to marry before we went south." He was surprised at that, now. "But I'm not even 16 yet. I can't even legally do this without father, nor would I want to," he responded as such. "Your father agreed to this marriage, Rob, and if we don't win this war, he'll never be able to attend anything anymore. The only thing we would be doing is push up the date. He already agreed to Alis and the terms of the marriage contract have been set up between us two. Even the dowry has been set, I have it with me," his foster father explained. "The dowry?" he asked. 10,000 golden dragons with me and the promise to invest the same amount in roads he is planning to build. However, that part I would leave until after the war, if you're alright with it. We also had a plan worked out to send Harry's firstborn son to Winterfell to foster with you when the time comes. I have my copy of the contract with me, but you'll probably find your father's copy in his desk. If you don't believe me, ask your maester. He was the one that wrote it all down." Rickard Karstark said. He nodded. It didn't seem unlike his father, and he knew the Karstarks weren't rich, so it seemed like a nice amount. The Karstarks' strength was in their military and their renown in the north, not coin, therefore the fostering was a great clause. "I will have to talk about it with my mother. How would you see it practically? I wanted to depart Winterfell as soon as possible." "Smart. Well, not all of your bannermen are here yet anyway. I would propose you marry Alis under the weirwood at Moat Cailin. There, all the nobility of the north can be in attendance and it would strengthen their view on you to see you wed into one of their own." Lord Rickard answered, clearly having anticipated this question. Mother won't be happy. She would not be able to plan or be in attendance, and there won't be a September, he mused. We are in a war, Rob. Who cares for feasts or for the South and their 7? We are of the North. If you two love each other and you are willing to marry, all you need is a weirwood tree and witnesses. Let Wyman bring a few dozen crates of ale with his army to have a small celebration, and let that be all. As such you wouldn't lose more than a day's march. He nodded once more. I will think about it. Good, now where is my room? I would like to change out of these damn riding clothes. Lord Ricard laughed. He answered the laugh in kind and showed him to his room personally. Tonight you, the Carstarkkin, and your most important captains will be welcomed at a small feast together with my family. We can talk more there. His foster father nodded and went inside without a word. That night went great, but his mother looked weird at him when the Carstarks hinted at the subject of marriage. As such she came to him first thing in the morning. What was all that talk about marriage yesterday, Rob? She demanded to know when she entered his room. He wasn't even fully dressed properly, but she didn't seem to care. Lord Ricard proposed for Alice and I to marry before I go south. That's why she's here. He even brought the dowry he and father agreed to with him. He explained. His mother looked to him in shock. Marry, but you're not yet of age. I know, that's why he asked and didn't push for anything. I said I would think about it and that I would discuss it with you first. He responded. That calmed his mother considerably and her features softened, clearly happy he wouldn't go behind her parental authority here. So, what are your thoughts on it? She finally asked. Well, he proposed we marry in a few weeks under the weirwood at Moat Cailin with all the northern lords in attendance. Strategically it would be a great move. All of the North's nobility would see us united just before we move south. I would also like to marry her. I love her, or at least I think I do. The only problem is I don't want to marry without your father there. I want my family to be there. He said sadly. Oh, Rob, come here. She said as she pulled him into a hug. She was the only one where he could show his insecurities with, for all others he needed to be strong. You really are still a boy if you think I would let you marry without me. She laughed. He pulled back and looked at her strangely. What do you mean? Well, it pains me to say it, but Lord Ricard might be right. It would seriously strengthen your grip over the army, and your father did the same thing with me before marching to the Battle of the Bells. Without that, you wouldn't be here. She laughed at him. He smiled back at her, before asking, so, what do you think? I think it is a good plan. Have Lord Mondaly bring with them all the things necessary for the marriage. We can pay him with the dowry for it. I will make one really big adjustment in your plans though. She laughed. Which is? He asked suspiciously. I will be there. Sansa, Rukan and I will go with the army to Moat Cailin, and we can return to Winterfell after the wedding with Alice. Arya can stay here and be the Stark of Winterfell under guidance from Lewyn, Jonel and Sir Roderick for a few weeks while we go back and forth. She said gleefully. Sansa just got back home, and you would have her leave again. Besides, would Arya really go for that? He asked. Sansa will be more than happy to be with her family and get an older sister in Alice. If you know your sister, you know she will not want to miss a wedding. His mother answered, and he nodded at that with a smile. As for Arya, she will have to. Rukan is too young and it wouldn't be smart for him to stay here without me, and Bran isn't here. Besides, it will only be for a month or so. She would not need to that much work in the position, as the army will just have left and you have heard all the grievances of the noble houses already now. Arya needs to know what it means to be a noble, and I think this might do it for her. She will have Sir Roderick, Jonel and Lewyn to advise her, and her friends here to keep her company. All will be well. She said, putting his doubts to rest. So, you agree then? Really? Not even going to make a problem about me not marrying in a September? He asked suspiciously, never having expected her to go along with it so quickly. Yes, I agree. For the September. I have long accepted that you wouldn't, Rob. The Carstarks are a proud northern house, and they wouldn't look kindly on a Stark wanting to marry in the light of the Seven. Besides that, it isn't even your own faith. You follow your father's gods, and I know that. The only reason for you to marry a northern girl in a September would be for me, and I love you for it, but it's not important enough to halt your marriage for it," she said as she smiled sadly. He looked at her in another light now. He always knew his mother had difficulty with adapting to the north, even if she grew comfortable and at home in Winterfell. Now, he saw her put those difficulties to the side for him and for their house, and he loved her even more for it. He came towards her and hugged her, and she gladly hugged him back. "I'll be damned, however, before Sansa or Bran marry without it also being in a September," she whispered defiantly in his ear. At this he laughed loudly and hugged her closer. Just over 2 weeks later. They had arrived at Moat Cailin 2 days ago and had managed to settle the host. Since his march, troops from the Sawins, Tall Hearts, Rewells, Dustins, both Lords Flint and the Hornwoods had joined them, either on their march or they had been waiting on them at Moat Cailin. He had only needed to wait for the Locks and Marndaelis. The former had arrived yesterday and the latter's banners were sighted by his scouts 2 hours ago. In the meantime, his mother and sister had worked tirelessly on preparing the wedding, which would take place tonight at the Weirwood. His mother and Lord Rickard had wanted to hold the wedding yesterday evening, but he had refused. For one, the Marndaelis would be slighted, a thing he had no intent on doing. Much more important to him personally, was the fact that he wanted his brother there. Jon, as the squire of Sir Wendell, would join his force with the Marndaelis. He had already decided he would make Jon one of his commanders, as he wanted his brother next to him. He didn't think Sir Wendell would refuse, but if he did, thought luck. He needed his brother when they went to save their father together. He walked over to the maps of the Riverlands and looked over them some more. After a while, he was disturbed by Horlis Mollin. "The Marndaelis have arrived, my lord. Your brother has been seen," as he rode into camp with the Marndaelis themselves at the head of the force. This made him smile, both for the idea of finally seeing Jon again and the fact that the Marndaelis honored him so. He picked up Ice from the corner of the room and buckled the scabbard on his back. "I send you Ice, our family's ancestral sword. Due to my injury, I will not be able to wield it ever again, so it is yours now, as it would have been after me anyway. Train with it as much as you can and use it well, it is no toy." His father had written to him in a letter that had accompanied the sword with Sansa. He had trained with it every day since he had gotten the sword, even on the march. He was really glad that it was so light, as otherwise he wouldn't have had the strength to use such a great sword. He would use it well. "I will do you proud with it, father," he said in silent prayer before leaving the gatehouse tower with Horlis. Only a few seconds later, a bunch of horsemen trotted over to his position in front of the tower. Next to it walked a big white direwolf. Suddenly the direwolf sped up and it clashed with Grey Wind, who came at a high speed from behind him. The beasts continued to roll across the dirt together, combined with the sounds of playful biting and nipping. The whole yard came to a halt, looking at the beasts, when suddenly Lady and Shadowdog arrived out of the crowd and joined in with their brothers. He looked upon the spectacle with a smile, before looking to his brother. He looked well. He was clad in armor with a white direwolf on it. Except for the color of the animal, it was very similar to his own. The silence was suddenly broken when the great Jon, to his right, boomed, "Bloody hell, there are even more of those animals, and the white one is even bigger than the others. We can just send them towards the Lannisters and sit the war out ourselves." At this the yard filled with a few snickers, as the look on the great Jon's expression was one filled with awe. "Only 2 of them will join us on our march, great Jon, but it will be the largest 2 and we'll make them count," he answered his commander. "Aye, we will," his brother answered with a smile, as he jumped off his horse and walked up to him. They hugged each other fiercely, as they laughed together. "It's good to see you, Snow," he said. "It's good to see you too, Stark," his brother answered, as he clapped him on the back. He then turned around, holding an arm over his brother's shoulder. "My lords, may I present you my brother Jon Snow?" Some cheers went up from around the courtyard. As his mother, who had arrived with Sansa and Rickon, looked sternly at him. Lord Rickard's face betrayed nothing. After this he turned respectfully back to the Marndaelis, who had been waiting patiently. "Sir Willis and Sir Wendell, it is good to see you. I welcome you and your host to Moat Cailin." Sir Willis shook his hand at that and laughed. "We hear there is more than that you invite us to, my lord." We have brought 6 dozen caskets of good northern ale with us, as we heard there is to be a wedding tonight. At the mention of so much ale, the whole yard erupted in cheers. The loudest among them, of course, coming from the area where the great Jon stood with his kin. You heard right, sir, and I thank you for bringing those with you. Now, unless you would like to wash yourself up first, I would like to invite you and your brother, the other lords and my own brother here, to our war council. He said respectfully, but loudly so all could hear. It would my honor, Lord Rob. Sir Willis said, as his brother nodded in confirmation. Follow me then. He said, and all the lords came forth from the crowds to join him upstairs. He had to motion to Jon, for him to join him. His brother had been swarmed by the hugs of both Little Rickon and Sangza. There will be time to see them later tonight, I promise. He said, as Jon nodded and followed him. The whole ordeal had taken hours, but their plan was finally finished. The Mandaelis had brought 1,500 men with them, including 200 mounted men and 20 knights, bringing his army up to well over 20,000. He looked around the room once more. Only the lords and commanders of the forces stood around the table with him. The airs were filtered on the benches further back so they could hear the plan but could not disrupt the process too much. Lord Ricard told him it was an old system and that it had been like that since long before he was a young heir himself. As such, the only men around the table that were of his age, were his brother and Domeric Bolton. The latter had been appointed by his aunt Lady Dustin as commander of her forces while she would stay in Barrowton. She was here for now, but she helped Sangza in preparing for the wedding and effectively led the command of the forces to Domeric. Lady Dustin and her father Lord Ricard had both sent very sizable contingents of troops, a thing that had surprised his foster father. He had apparently expected them to send as little as possible, due to the rift between them and House Stark. However, he had happily noted that his father seemed to have successfully fixed that. Whatever the case, he was impressed by Domeric. He didn't seem anywhere as frightening or cold as his father, but his comments on strategy showed he possessed the same capable mind as Roose Bolton. He would keep an eye on the man, as he could prove very interesting. My lords, there is one more piece of intel that I need to give you. My father sent me a letter where he describes a confrontation he had with Petter Baelish, the Master of Coin and some petty Vale Lord or the other. The man had apparently slandered my mother and aunt, saying he bedded them. When my father confronted the man, he cowered and admitted to have never come near my mother. He did, however, admit to bedding my aunt Lysa Arryn. The man himself said it was only once before her marriage, but my father had his doubts about that. He stated, and all the man looked angry at the mention of someone slandering Lady Stark. Lord Baelish was brought to court by Jon Arryn, via his wife. Due to this and the descriptions that he has about Robert Arryn, Lysa's son and the now Lord of the Vale, he writes in his letter that he suspects my cousin to actually be Baelish's bastard. This would mean he would have no claim to the Vale and could have a big impact on the war. My father felt a big responsibility towards Jon Arryn to fix this. On the other side, the boy is my cousin. How would you proceed with this? The news hit like an onager shot amongst his men, most notably those that had fought with Jon Arryn and his father in the rebellion. The lords started bickering among themselves until Lord Glover asked him, "Are you sure about this, my lord?" He looked at the man and said, "No, I am not. I only know what my father wrote, and his evidence is circumstantial. However, I believe my father wouldn't send it to me if he didn't believe it to be true." This created more bickering amongst the lords, until the great Jon boomed above everybody in the room, "Ned Stark's word is enough for me. If he believes it to be true, so do I." At this most of the room shouted their agreement. "Thank you, lords. The question remains, however, how do we proceed?" he asked. "We can bring the boy down, together with the Lannisters," Sir Donal Locke proudly proclaimed. "That's foolish, Donal. We can't fight 2 wars at once." Lord Harley's Hornwood intermitted. "Can't we just leave the Southerners to their plots, while we save Ned?" a number boomed from the back of the room. "Do you know what your aunt and the Vale are planning to do, my lord?" "We have heard nothing of the Vale's troop movements as of yet." Sir Wylis Mandaeli asked him. "No sir, I do not. She refuses to respond to either mine or my mother's letters or her brother's from Riverrun," he admitted. At this, more bickering started, until Roose Bolton asked in his typical calm voice, Can we strong-arm her into joining us in the war with this news? He looked at the Lord calmly. Internally all the stories about Boltons that he ever heard were alarming him to the man in front of him. He saw flashbacks to the young woman who had escaped his bastard's clutches a few years ago. I don't believe that would be a wise course of action, Lord Bolton. First of all, she will probably ignore the letter anyway. Second of all, she might align herself with the Lannisters in response to the threat. He responded. The Lord nodded, seemingly agreeing with his assessment. At last his foster father spoke up. Could we not keep this information to ourselves for now? Even if we manage to strong-arm Lady Lysa, which I don't think will work, the Vale army would come too late to help Riverrun. We can wait with this news until we have freed the Tullys. Another option would be to contact the Vale's vassals directly. I remember Bronze Yone and it seems his son is mentioned to have died protecting Ned. If Lady Lysa refuses to stir the Vale, maybe Bronze Yone can do it in her place, with or without her. He finished his plea. He looked at his mentor for a long while, before looking at the other lords. Lords Bolton, Hornwood and Flint seemed to be in agreement, joined by Sirs Wylis Marndale and Ricard Riswell. At the same time, the great Jon bellowed. Who cares about those southern flowers? We don't need them anyway. Ignoring this outburst but taking it as indifference, he said to his lords. Good, I'll take the option mentioned by Lord Carstark. Once we have aided Riverrun against Jaime Lannister, we will look at this once more and see if the Vale has stirred yet or not. With all the lords in agreement, he finished the meeting. He stood in front of the weirwood tree and looked around at all the lights his sister and mother had hung up. The place looked beautiful and the weirwood tree was flanked by two big stark banners, who hung over the adjoining trees. In front of him sat the gathered nobility of the north. Every house was in attendance, except for most of the mountain clans, who hadn't been able to muster their forces in time for the march. Most houses had sent their lords or heirs with the army, if not both. If not, they had sent second sons, brothers, nephews or cousins all eagerly waiting to join his army with a force of their own. Along the march he had been able to talk with many a lord about the marriage and most of them reacted in the same way. They were all happy he was going to marry a northern vassal's daughter. Multiple lords had commented on the fact that the northern houses had missed out on opportunities for their daughters to become Lady of Winterfell for a long time, after his father had married a southern lady and his grandfather his Stark cousin. All were happy, but annoyed he wasn't marrying their daughter or sister. Still, it was clear no one would ever object to the marriage, as the Carstark name carried enough weight for his future lady. All of that had been expected, but it was good to confirm it either way. What had been unexpected, was how some lords came to ask him about Sansa or Arya and who they would marry. He had answered them all in the same stoic manner, saying that they may take this up with his father as they please, when they have liberated him from the Lannisters. That easily ended those conversations. Looking around, he saw Smalljon smile at him, with his father, brother and uncles next to him. Sir Wylis and Sir Wendell Marndale were sitting next to each other, nodding respectfully when they saw him looking. Like this, there were many, many others. Over 100 nobles, big and small, had gathered in the small forest clearing. On the front row, on the left side of the path sat his mother, Rickon and Sansa. Lady Riswell, who had stayed for the wedding, sat behind Sansa. Jon sat next to Sansa. His mother had raged at him for wanting this, but he hadn't budged and he was glad for it. On the right side, sat the Carstarks. There was an empty chair next to the path, reserved for Lord Ricard for after he gave away Alis. Next to the seat were, in order, Harry, Ed and To, and they were all smiling at him. He smiled back, but before he could see their reactions, he saw something move from the corner of his eye. As one, the whole group turned towards the people arriving on the clearing and he saw Alis. Alis was dressed in a white gown, lined with black wool. On the shoulders of her gown there were embroidered designs of wolves chasing suns as the sunbeams seemed to stream over her arms in intricate designs of black lace. Her maiden cloak, that hung over her shoulders, was black as the night, with a great white sun in the middle. Next to her was Lord Ricard, in a fine black doublet with intricate sun designs all over. He held Alis closely and looked at him with a proud smile on his face. "Who comes before the old gods?" Jon asked as he stood up. He had asked him to do so as their father wasn't here and his mother didn't follow their gods. "Lady Alis, of House Carstark," a woman grown, true-born and noble. She comes to beg the blessings of the gods. Who comes to claim her? Lord Ricard said proudly, puffing his chest out even more than he already had. Robb, of House Stark, true-born son and heir to Lord Eddard Stark. Who gives her? He heard himself say. I, Ricard, Lord of House Karstark. Her father. His mentor and soon-to-be father-in-law stated. Jon continued after this. Lady Alis, do you take this man as your husband before the gods? I take this man. Alis said clearly. After this, both walked forward and Lord Ricard gave him Alis' hand. He nodded to Lord Ricard before kneeling with Alis before the weirwood, and he heard how, almost, all the nobles followed them. He prayed for the rescue of his father and for a happy marriage, filled with children that would make his father and mother proud. He then stood up and removed Alis' maiden cloak and replaced it with a Stark one. His mother had given it to him and had told him that it was the same bride's cloak his father had placed around her shoulders. When he had cloaked his bride, Grey Wind suddenly sat upright and howled loudly. Soon Shadowdog and Lady joined in, while Ghost silently walked over to Grey. There he stood, proudly but silently, next to his brother as to show his approval to the marriage. As the wolves stopped howling, they started walking through the forest together, with Grey Wind marching beside them. When they were at the edge of the camp, he pulled her in his arms and carried her towards the feasting area that had been reserved for the nobility as was tradition. Every guard they passed whistled and shouted Stark, with a sense of dedication that was still foreign to him. The feast went by like an only half-remembered dream. The great Jon drank many a lord under the table, while his family and remaining lords seemed to enjoy themselves. All he could do was look and talk with Alis, his wife. After what seemed like minutes but must have been hours, the great Jon suddenly screamed. A good wedding needs a bedding, my friends, and I think young Lord Robb has waited long enough for his already. The scant was easily picked up by many lords, and he nodded to his mother and lords and stood up together with Alis. He gave his new wife over to the safe hands of her brothers and the small Jon, while he accompanied his mother, sister, Lady Barbary and Winifred Marndale towards his room. They were the only noble women in attendance, and so he didn't have it hard. He soon reached his rooms in the gatehouse tower dressed in his undergarments and trousers. Only moments after Alis arrived, only wearing her undergarments but being shielded by Ed and Harry from further handlings his commanders would want to make. He thanked Ed and Harry, and soon the door closed behind them. They looked awkwardly at each other for a while, not knowing what to say. He finally offered her some wine, which she gladly accepted. It was an Arbor Red, from a very nice vintage. One of the more lavish gifts Lord Marndale had given him for the wedding. Are you afraid? He asked finally. A little, she replied honestly, as she shyly looked into his eyes. He nodded, not knowing what to reply. Have you done it before? She asked timidly. No, he admitted, as he awkwardly shuffled his left feet across the floor, but I have heard a lot about it and should know what to do. That's good. She replied with a shy smile on her face. Yes, I wouldn't want to hurt you or anything. So, I'll try to remember. He said, thinking it very strange that the filthy boasting the Karstark cousins made would ever be considered good. No, she laughed. It's good that it's your first time too. I like it that way. I wanted you to be the one who I did it with, and I am happy I am your first too. She said, as her pinks turned reddish, while she looked at her feet. Oh, he said, feeling the blush creep on his own face. For a while they awkwardly stared at their feet until he finally asked. Can I kiss you? Like we used to do in the Godswood. She looked up at that and smiled. I would like that very much, Robb. He walked forward very slowly, never looking away from her eyes. He then put his hand on the side of her head and slowly lowered his own lips towards hers. When they touched each other after all these months, it felt like something exploded inside of him. Soon all his worries were gone, and hers as well it seemed, as she deepened the kiss. They stumbled to the bed together, giggling and kissing. He was too entranced by her, to think about anything else except her red lips and his hands sliding over her back. He let his hands slide lower and pulled her up, kissing her again, before slowly lowering her onto the bed. He looked at her and she looked at him encouragingly, and so he kissed her again as he moved his body on top of her. Like that, they kissed for what seemed to be hours, their hands exploring each other over their undergarments. After a while they took off their remaining clothes and kissed again. Finally, he looked at her and asked, "Are you ready?" "Yes," she smiled at him as she pulled him down at his neck for another kiss. Chapter 19, Negotiations and Discussions. 299 AC. Rob. He had had 3 wonderful days and nights with Alice. He couldn't get enough of her and she of him. They made love every evening and every morning. He had even come a little late to all 3 of the morning meetings with his commanders. All of them had knowingly smiled, but none had complained. Only the great Jon had made a comment, laughing that they should call him the late wolf instead. After those 3 days, he had moved south with his army. They had passed through the neck unhindered and had entered the riverlands. His scouts had confirmed that, due to flooding, there was only one crossing point above the Trident and it was on the bridge of House Free. As such, they marched there now. He looked around and talked some more with Lord Harley's Hornwood, the commander he had chosen to ride next to him this morning. Finally, they reached the Twins and, while his army was slowly finishing their march, he gathered most of his lords and commanders as he saw the walls were heavily manned. "The Freys are my uncle's bannermen. Why are they here and why don't they let us through?" he asked perplexed. Lord Meagersorwin responded sadly, "These Southrons don't take loyalty as seriously as we do, Lord Rob." The Lord, Walder Free was late to the Battle of the Trident as well. He is a greedy bastard and will do nothing if he doesn't gain something first. He saw how much of the room agreed with this analysis and most looked angry. "I should burn their castle and wipe out their house root and stem for this," he said angrily. "You should, my lord. However, you can't. The only way to take this place is to surround it from both sides and starve it out. The Freys' entire force is inside there, storming the walls would do us no good." Lord Galbert Glover stated pragmatically. "For our plan to continue, we need to negotiate then," he asked to the room and all men nodded. "Good, I will go and make sure we can cross the river," he said, thinking the whole deal finished. His lords thought otherwise as suddenly they all started speaking or even shouting at him. He looked around perplexed but couldn't hear them as they were all talking together. "One at a time, my lords, please," he responded. The great Jon took it upon himself to respond, "You can't go in there. If he captures you, he can take out the whole army and just wait for the Lannisters to attack us here. There would be no way for us to go and free you. Negotiate I, but not you personally. Send one of us to do the talking so you can stay with the army." At this many of the lords nodded in agreement. He saw how Lord Bolton was readying himself to propose to go inside, so he cut in quickly. "All right, my lords, if that seems to you the best possible course of action I will do so. Lord Karstark will go and negotiate for me. The Freys might be insulted that I don't go personally, sending my father-in-law might ease that a little." At this the lords grumbled a bit, but they all accepted. Stern Lord Rickard was a good choice to deal with the prickly Lord Walder. He would never give in to outrageous demands, but could use diplomacy if needed. "That will be all for now, Lord Rickard, a word please," he said, and his words ended the meeting. "I trust you completely, Lord Rickard. However, we need to talk about how far we are willing to negotiate. You always told me that to go into negotiations without having at least a maximum offer in your head would lose you the negotiations before they start," he said, thinking of his lessons in Carhold. Lord Karstark nodded approvingly. "Good, you have listened to me all those years." "I did, I had to," he chuckled, before continuing. "What do you think they will ask?" He said, stroking his beard. "I think he will want a marriage. He would have wanted you, I think. He will be annoyed that you are already married." His father-in-law chuckled. "Then I'm very lucky that you brought Alice and the proposal to marry earlier with you," he said honestly. "Yes, you are." The man chuckled. "Lord Free will still want his marriage though. House Tully scoffs at them at every turn and marrying into House Stark would be a great boon to them." "Then what do you propose?" he asked, not wanting his siblings married to the children of an oathbreaker. "I would propose Sansa. She is a real beauty and a gem and could go very far in securing House Free as an ally for generations." "Never. Sansa has just come home to the north and I will not send her south again against her will. She is one of the most beautiful girls in the kingdoms. Besides, she can do a lot better than a Free, he argued fiercely, thinking about what his little sister had had to endure in King's Landing with Joffrey and father's injury. Okay, well the next best offer we can make is Bran, I think. Lord Ricard said cautiously. Bran, he asked surprised. Yes, Bran is for now the second in line to the north. I hope in all my heart that he won't be for long and that Aelys gives you a child soon, but to negotiate it is an interesting take. He was also fostered by the Tullys and that might give Lord Walder another angle there, as he is by far the Stark with the best relationships in the Riverlands. His father-in-law explained. He hummed, while thinking long and hard. Bran's fostering and marriage in the Riverlands might make a very interesting combination. It would mean that he could be a big player in the Riverlands, even receiving lands from House Tully was possible. On the other side, if he was to take command of Moat Cailin, it would be very good for him to have connections on both sides of the neck. All right, a possible betrothal for Bran would be possible but no one else. If it comes to that, make sure that he marries a girl from the main branch, not the daughter of a ninth son or something, he responded seriously. Lord Ricard nodded and they went to see the messengers from House Free that had arrived by now. Lord Ricard gave official command of the Karstark forces to Harry, before following the Freys inside with nothing more than a few guards to follow him. They got some Freys in return, but he still hoped nothing was going to happen. He couldn't afford to lose his mentor in this war. Ricard Karstark. He entered the Great Hall at the Twins and came eye to eye with Lord Walder. The wrinkly old man didn't seem like much, but he could see something in his eyes that made him pause. The man was greedy and cunning. The first he could use, the second he would be cautious about. Ha, who are you? I expected a Stark here, the one leading the army, not some petty lord or the other in his place. Lord Walder stated bluntly. Father, please. This is law. Sir Stephen tried to defend him but was interrupted by his father. I think he can tell me himself who he is, don't you, Stephen? You are not the Lord yet, son. You listen to me until then. After that, the man sitting turned towards him. He didn't let it get to him and stated. I am Lord Ricard Karstark, head of House Karstark and Lord of Karhold. Other than that, I am also the father-in-law to Robb Stark, the one leading the army and the heir to Lord Eddard Stark. All the Freys in the room looked at him with boredom, until he stated that he was Robb's father-in-law. After that, they all turned to him and looked at him in surprise. The young Stark is already married. Why didn't I hear about this before? Lord Walder stated, clearly not happy at this fact. He married my daughter Aelys 10 days ago in Moat Cailin. He simply stated. I wanted to offer the young Stark heir one of my daughters or granddaughters myself. It's a pity for those beautiful ladies, don't you think? The old man tried to bait him. A real pity for both sides, Lord Walder, although Robb and Aelys are very happy together. I don't think there could be a better match. He stated, answering the man's jest. They looked at each other for a few seconds then until he finally continued, however intriguing this all is, I would like to speak to you in private if I may, Lord Walder. The man looked at him for a while before nodding. He clapped in his hands and shouted out, and all his descendants streamed out of the great hall one by one. Now, speak, the man commanded. As you know, we have an army of over 20,000 outside your gates and we would like to cross, to help your liege lord in Riverrun. We also wondered why you weren't there to help protect it from Jaime Lannister. He stated evenly. Ha, as if I could. The young fish, Ed Muir, has managed to get himself bested by the Kingslayer. He even got himself captured by the blonde fucker. As you see, I mustered my men to join him, but there is no army that my sons can join now, so they stayed here. Lord Walder said sarcastically. This was news to him, as they hadn't received that information yet. They had received other interesting news. They had scouted Lord Tywine to the south and it seemed he was marching on the Trident but hadn't reached it yet. He was said to be followed by Sir Brynden Tully, who constantly attacked his garrisons and supply lines, which hampered Lord Tywin's speed. I'm sad to hear about Lord Edmure's loss, but it doesn't change anything. We would like to cross to help Riverrun. If your sons would like an army to attach themselves to, you can join us without a problem. He said, calling the Freys bluff. You're a smart one, aren't you? Well, if you would like to come to business so quick, I'll just ask you. What's in it for me? The man asked cockily. Besides the gratitude of your liege lord and his heir, you mean Lord Free, he simply responded. Gratitude, for the Tullys insult us at every turn. That Edmure has refused to marry one of my daughters for years. I even let him pick which one, but he didn't want to. Lord Hoster also refused to turn up to my latest marriage, and you think I will just accept their gratitude? No, I need something in return, the man ranted. He stared stoically in the man's eyes, before saying after the appropriate time, what would you want, Lord Free? I like to hear that. I want one of my sons to marry one of your Master Rob's sisters. I hear the eldest one is quite a beauty and that she has the Tully look. I would love to see Hoster's face when he sees his granddaughter married to one of my boys. The man said, while licking his lips. I am afraid I must refuse that offer. Lady Sansa and her sister Lady Arya are non-negotiable for marriage. He cut that trail of thought short. At this, Lord Walder looked wroth. You dare refuse me, like Hoster Tully did? In my own hall? You have some nerve, Carstark. Lord Rob has explicitly told me that both his sisters are not negotiable, but if it's a marriage you want, then things can still be discussed. He stated diplomatically. This clearly got the man's interest, as his eyes squinted together. What do you propose? Brandon Stark, Rob's younger brother, is without a betrothed. He is being fostered in Riverrun, has good connections with houses Blackwood and Deary, and is Hoster's favorite grandchild. He also is the second in line to Winterfell and the North, with its lord in captivity and heir on the battlefield. Wouldn't one of your daughters or granddaughters be suitable to marry him? He said, watching the old lord's eyes very closely. Ha, Hoster's favorite grandchild, you say? That is a nice one. I suppose it's right too, with all his other ones in those frosted lands to the north or east. Still, the boy has no titles or lands to his name. Why would I send my daughter to live with someone who has nothing? Lord Walder said, although it was clear he liked the idea. Well, Lord Brandon is only 8 years old. However, it is expected that he will receive lands either in the north or in the Riverlands by his Stark or Tully kin. There even is a possibility that he will receive Moat Cailin and become your neighbor, as the Starks are looking to rebuild it. He answered the man, trying to play on his greed. Moat Cailin, you say? That's a mighty fortress indeed. Walder, my Estevran's offspring through his eldest grandson, would be a good candidate. Let's say I would accept the offer to join House Free with House Stark and Tully through young Brandon. What else would I get? The old Weasley Free asked greedily. What else would you want? You have just gotten a marriage into one of the great houses. He asked, making clear he would not just offer the man whatever he wanted. Well, I only got a marriage to a second son. Although I'm very happy with that, I would require more for me to send my troops with you. I can muster 4,000 men, of which 1,000 are knights. This is a very sizable force for you to gain, as well as access to my bridge. So, I ask you again, what more do I get? The old and wrinkled lord asked. What would you want? He rebounded the question. As you know, I have many sons and grandsons. Many of the younger ones don't have too good a future. That would change if, say 2 of them, would be fostered at Winterfell under a great house. The man said, a small smile creeping up on his face. That could be arranged, I think. What else? He answered suspiciously. Well, maybe young Rob could use a squire. My son Oliver would love to do so, he's a good kid besides. Rob is no knight. He bluntly retorted. That doesn't matter, when time comes to knight him, he can just ask one of the knights in his army. The Free waved away his response. We accept. I expect that to be all, he stated, as he started to become really angry at the greed of the wrinkly old man before him. Well no, you see I have many sons, daughters, grandchildren, bastards and the like. Through them and mine and their marriages, I have forged many bonds with houses all over the Riverlands, Vale and Westerlands. We do not have such good bonds with the North, and it pains me deeply. As such I would propose some of your lords present to marry my daughters. The man said, now openly showing his cunning smile. That could, of course, be arranged, however I cannot speak for other houses. They would never accept without big dowries, that I know. The northern houses might see more strategic importance to marry into each other, the only thing they do not have is coin. If you wish to marry into our nobility, it is that you should offer them. He said wisely, thinking how this issue could easily be solved and gain him some influence along the way. If some of the poorer or smaller houses were to marry their lords or heirs to a free, it would weaken their ability to ally together against him. As such, he could keep the hold and power he held in the north through heirless marriage and Rob's fostering more easily. Besides, an influx of coin could help the north and Ned and Rob's plans for it greatly. The man in front of him looked at him quite intensely, before the smile returned once more. Of course, Lord Carstock, I wouldn't expect you to make marriage pacts for some of the other houses, but perhaps your own house could use some coin, the man asked knowingly. He looked at the man, knowing he was caught. There was absolutely no way he would ever marry Harry onto a free or any Southron at that, as he wouldn't want the future of House Carstock to descend from this weasel. That didn't mean they couldn't use the coin. They could, as Ned had proposed, finally make work of the old road network. Maybe they could also start working on a little port, to make more from trade with Skagos, the Night's Watch, the Mondalis and Flints in the summer. My second son, Eddard Carstock, does not have a wife yet, Lord Free. Maybe I could be persuaded to join our houses there, for the right price of course. He, another second son. Why would I go for that, Lord Carstock? The man said, as his squinted eyes tried to intimidate him. Not caring about the Weasel Lord's empty gestures, he responded calmly. That second son is one of the best friends of the heir to the north and also his brother-in-law. If he distinguishes himself in the campaign here, he might receive lands from House Stark in the north. If not, I plan to give him lands myself. Lands that can only be developed through your given dowry. He looked the man in the eyes, while saying it. He made it clear to the man in front of him that we would not receive a better offer than this. After that, both of them looked at each other for a long time. Until finally, Lord Walder said, I'll give your son half of his Frizbride's weight in silver, if he was to pick one. That offer only counts if you manage to convince some of the other lords and heirs to pick one as well, of course. Every lord or heir who accepts will get her full weight in silver as well. 3/4 of her weight in silver and we have a deal, Lord Walder. He responded, not afraid to haggle on the price of Ed's wife for the sake of his family. Bah, 2/3 and be done with this, Lord Carstock. I expect at least 2 heirs or lords to take my offer, or you can build your own bridge in time to escape Lord Tywine. The man said, clearly annoyed that he wasn't the only one who could haggle in this conversation. Good. If that is everything, Lord Free, I will take it up with the northern lords and send word of it to you this evening. We expect to begin crossing tomorrow morning, joined by your sons and their forces. He stated clearly, daring the man to contradict him. Yeah, my sons will be there, and our forces are already mustered and ready to march. I eagerly await your reply and I expect your son and the 2 other lucky Northmen to see me tomorrow. He said, while waving his hand dismissingly. He grinded his teeth, without making it show, nodded and left. Glad to be away from that Weasley prick. Later that day. Rob. Lord Rickard had just told the lords of the meeting with Lord Free. It was as they had expected, Bran was betrothed. He didn't much care for the squire or the 2 wards. He was really glad that he had vetoed betrothals for Sansa and Arya, as that had clearly been what Lord Free had been after. What did surprise him was the demand for at least 3 of his nobility to marry into House Free. The greed of Lord Walder really knew no bounds. It had not been received well by most of his lords, until Lord Carstock had told them of Ed's betrothal and the huge dowry Lord Free proposed. Now all were weighing their options, if they needed the coin or not. He and his lords were also shocked to hear about his uncle Edmure's defeat and capture at Riverrun, although it didn't matter too much for his plans. Finally, Lord Harley's Hornwood spoke up after having spoken to his son at the back of the tent. My son Darin will marry a free girl to get us over that stupid bridge, but only with the dowry as stated. That didn't surprise him much. House Hornwood was a very small family and it was of importance for Darin to marry quickly. They were also quite poor, so the coin could really help the Hornwoods and that part of the north. Lord Harley's himself had married a Mondaly cousin for the same reason, as they needed coin for winter. He nodded. Thank you, Lord Harley's and Darin. Your effort and help through this campaign will not be forgotten. Lord Harleys nodded gladly at that, always wanting to be on the good side with House Stark. My son Domeric will marry one too, Lord Roose Bolton said, from the other side of the table. At this, he and many others were surprised. The Boltons were one of the strongest lords in the north, they didn't need this as much as the Hornwoods. The more he thought about it, it made some sense. The Boltons were a small family as well, and they would still get a marriage relation with their neighbours the Hornwoods from it. Although he was quite sure Lord Roose had thought about all this, it surely was the money he looked most forward to. He looked towards Domeric, who looked at his father. He hid it well, but it looked like he wasn't pleased. It seemed Roose hadn't bothered speaking with his son about this first, like Lord Harleys had done. It was his prerogative as head of House Bolton, of course, but it clearly showed strained relations within the house itself. The father not bothering to even consult his son. What he found most curious was that Domeric's aunt had been known to be pushing Domeric towards Sansa. Roose seemed to completely ignore a marriage to House Stark for coin here. Good, thank you as well Lord Roose and Domeric. He sat down and started to write a letter on a piece of paper. In the meantime, he said. Another very interesting piece of news has just reached us through our scouts. Lord Glover, if you will. He waved his hand at Lord Galbert, without looking up from his letter. News has again reached us that Lord Tywine has left Harrenhal. Nothing new there, except that we have gotten word that the Blackfish has successfully managed to defeat a force under Sir Gregor Clegane sent to capture Stonehenge, the seat of House Bracken. In response Lord Tywine has split off 1,500 men under Sir Flamant Brax to deal with the Blackfish. It seems that this force has marched deeper into the Riverlands to follow the Tully. They will not be able to join the main Lannister force in time before our eastern force reaches them, as they still march north. Lord Galbert Glover said happily. At this the mood immediately improved among his lords. The fact that at least one of the Tullys seemed to win battles, even if they were small, was a huge relief. The fact that Lord Tywine had split off almost 10% of his force to deal with him was even better as it made the mission of his eastern force a little less dangerous. John, please give this to a messenger to deliver it to Lord Walder. He said as he looked up at his lords. It is a confirmation of the deal with Lord Walder Free. I also ask them to make sure their cavalry is readied on the western bank tomorrow morning. Their cavalry will come with me to Riverrun, while their infantry will march with the Eastern Army. At this most of the lords nodded approvingly. Who will command the Eastern force, Lord Robb? Roose Bolton asked. Lord Karstark will command. If it's all right for you my lords, I would like him to be joined and aided by Lords Bolton, Hornwood and Sir Wyn, Sir Wylis Marndaly, Ricard Rewell, Sir Donal Locke and Robert Glover. He said while looking at all the men individually as he called their names. Lords Umber, Flint and Glover, Lady Mormont, Sir Wendell Marndaly, Domeric Bolton, Owen Norrie, Robin Flint, Roose Ryswell and Harry on Karstark, will join me in the west. Sir Helman Tallheart will remain here to ensure Lord Walder's loyalty and augment the garrison with 400 men. He continued, looking upon those men as well. Those of you or your kin, whom I have not called personally can join either your house's infantry or cavalry. The Frizz will split in two, their 2,500 infantry will join with Lord Ricard, some 800 cavalry will join me. Any more questions? None of his lords spoke up. Then this meeting is over. Get a good day of rest, because the coming days will have hard marches and battles in store for us. He said and the nobles started to march out of the tent. Only Roose Bolton stayed behind. Why did you ask my son to join you in the west? The man asked when they were alone. He looked at the lord's pale haunting eyes and responded. I did it for multiple reasons. First and foremost, Domeric seems to have a keen mind in strategy and is an excellent horse rider and as such would be very useful in the Western Army. Secondly, your son is the commander of the Dustin troops, as such he might lead both Dustin and Bolton cavalry in the west. While either you or Ricard Rewell could lead its infantry in the east. Thirdly, I like Domeric. He is a good companion and I would like him to join me for that. He is the heir to one of the strongest northern houses and it seems intelligent to me to build a good relationship with him. He said very honestly. He didn't think that flattering would work on Roose Bolton, but it was worth a shot. Besides, it was all true. So, it didn't matter too much in his eyes. Roose Bolton looked at him silently for a long while, before thanking him and leaving without saying another word. Ned. It was dark in his cell and he was alone. His leg hurt like hell and he felt feverish. The stench of rot and shit was everywhere. He couldn't remember the last time that his bucket had been emptied. If he was fair, he couldn't remember what time or day they were now. All he knew was that he had been for a long time, multiple weeks at least, but how many was only for the gods to know. He slept most of the time and only seldom had clear moments like this anymore. He preferred the sleep, as it hurt less. He got food every morning and evening. At first, he had tried to count the days like that, but after passing out on and off for a few days and losing count, he had given up on that idea. He wondered how it would be with his children or with Kat. He thanked the gods every day for giving him the wisdom to send Sansa and her friends home. Veon was probably killed in the fighting, but at least his line and daughter would survive. Sending Ice home was also a great decision. It would strengthen Robb's position in the north when he came of age. To wield the sword the Starks had carried from before the conquest was a powerful signal that had also worked for him in the rebellion. He thought about Ice and cleaning it in the pools of the godswood of Winterfell. Oh, how he longed to be back in his ancestral home. To see the weirwood tree, his wife and children and his people once more. The more he stayed here, the more he had come to the realization that he was going to die though. If he stayed here for another month, maybe two, he would without a doubt succumb to the wound on his leg. If they actually got him a maester, he might yet be killed for treachery. For, there was no more doubt that blonde screaming boy was the incestuous child of Cersei and the Kingslayer. The way he screamed for the blood of his men and people and the way he looked weren't normal. There was madness in that boy's eyes, a madness before only seen in Targaryens. Why would they let him live? If he was freed, he would take up arms against them without a doubt, oaths he needed to swear be damned. If he wasn't, well, the North would never bow to the Lannisters. They might go to war or they might just outright secede, blocking White Harbor, Barrowton and Moat Cailin and letting the South destroy itself. He thought about his ancestor Cregan and how he had been right about everything. He had come down with his army, cleaned up King's Landing and gone home. He had wanted to clean up the whole South but had been denied that. As such the intrigue, plots and filth had taken root in the capital once more. He should have done the same as his ancestor. Come down with Robert, but with an army at his side. After having cleaned out everything, he would have seated Robert comfortably on the throne and left for Winterfell. Alas, how could he have known? He thought some more about the mistakes he had made, when suddenly a Gauler entered his room with a torch. He shied away from the light and asked himself what the man was doing here. Lord Eddard, the man spoke, in a voice that seemed oddly familiar. Yes. He responded, but his throat was so sore and dry that he started coughing badly. Here, take this. The man said as he gave him something. Looking at it, he suddenly realized it was a wineskin. He opened it and drank deeply. The warmth of the wine rejuvenated his whole body for a few seconds and fixed the dryness in his throat. Without saying a word, the man handed him 2 loaves of bread. He accepted them without thinking and ate fast. After finishing one piece, he finally asked. Who are you? You mean you don't recognize me, Lord Eddard, the man said. He looked closer at the man, being used to the torchlight by now. He looked at him intensely for a moment, while the man said nothing. He suddenly saw it. Lord Varys, he asked. Yes, my lord. That is indeed who I am. He now looked at the man with hate, clearly remembering how he had said that the commander of the Gold Cloaks hadn't been corrupt. What are you doing here? He grunted. What a welcome, my good lord. However, I understand that your accommodations are rather imperfect and so I will let it slide. The man responded, all sweet smiles. He merely scoffed at that. The eunuch, understanding he wasn't going to say more, finally talked about why he was here. King Joffrey allows you to take the black, if you renounce your statements and admit to treachery to unlawfully seat Lord Stannis on the throne. He will allow you to serve on the wall with your brother Benjen. Your son Robb will swear fealty and will retain all your lands and titles and will be awarded the position of Warden of the North, if he goes back to Winterfell without a fight. Varys proposed to him. He scoffed. You think the North will accept Cersei's bastard on the throne? Let alone my unrightful capture and sentence. Give me one reason why I would accept this offer. I'll give you a few, my lord. The Lannisters have invaded the Riverlands, quite successfully I'm afraid. Jaime Lannister has come down from the Golden Tooth and beaten a force under Lord Edmure Tully. Lord Edmure has been captured and Riverrun has been put to siege, with your young son Brandon inside of it. Meanwhile Lord Tywine has infiltrated from the Gold Road, capturing Harrenhal and burning the Riverlands from the Gold Road to the Trident. Varys said, and he felt fear grip his stomach, as he thought about Bran in a keep under siege. That is not the thing that will interest you the most, however. Your son Robb is marching down from Moat Cailin at the head of an army of Northmen. He is accompanied by your natural son Jon and many of your old friends, as they march down towards the army of Lord Tywine Lannister. A clash between them will probably be happening in a few weeks. The only way to stop it would be to admit guilt and try to make peace, before House Tully and the Northern Army are completely destroyed. What would happen with young Robb, Jon and Brandon if they get captured by the Lannisters? They could even be killed in the fighting. Is that what you wish for, Lord Eddard? The spider said, weaving a dreadful web of misfortune for his family. What of it was true though? He knew the spider to construct webs of lies or omit truths, like he had done about Janos Slynt and the Gold Cloaks. Where was Sir Brynden in this story? The man was a great military general and would never stand by idly while his country burned, yet the spider made no mention of him. Robb would be marching south. When he thought about it, it was logical. Robb was too young, but he didn't really have a choice and was thought by Lord Rickard which wouldn't allow him to shy away from this. Thinking about Rickard made think about the army. Robb was very well learned in military strategy by him, Rickard and Mayor Stillowin. Jon was already quite capable at diplomacy and negotiations for his age. They most likely also had the help of Rickard, Mage, Gratian, Sir Willis, Meager, Harleys and others. Some of them were good military generals and others capable diplomats. With the backing of Rickard through the betrothal, the Northern Army would likely be capably led and united. Did he really have to worry for Robb and Jon? No, he shouldn't. Bran was another story, although Riverrun wouldn't fall quickly. The castle, although much smaller than Winterfell, was a nightmare to besiege. You needed 3 camps split by rivers to besiege them, with little or no easy communication possible between your camps and all of that in enemy lands. They would hold out for months, if not years. More than enough time for Robb and Jon or Stannis and Renly to defeat the Lannisters. He would not give in to this lying spider, who knows what he was keeping from him. You are very silent, my lord. I suppose you realize why it's a good idea to take this deal? Varys asked, a subtle bit of smugness mixed into his voice. He looked up to the bald eunuch and responded. Then you suppose wrong, Lord Varys. I'd rather die here with my honor and family intact than live in shame of a crime I didn't commit for the rest of my life. Surprised, the man looked him in the eyes. You can't be serious, Lord Eddard. The Tullys are all but defeated and your son, an inexperienced boy, has no chance to defeat Lord Tywine in battle. You have already missed so much of your family. At the wall, you might be able to visit them and see them grow, just like your brother came to Winterfell. It seems you already missed the marriage of your heir Robb. Do you want to miss all the others and their youths too? Marriage of Robb, was all he responded. Yes, my little birds tell me that he married Aelys Karstark at Moat Cailin with his army before marching south. You already missed that. Do you wish to miss all the rest as well? The eunuch insisted, clearly thinking that he would cave in now. He just grinned, of course he would, Rickard, you sly bastard. Robb even married in front of the whole Northern Army, that would unite the force even more. He must also have married in front of a weirwood only, as there were no septs anywhere close to Moat Cailin. Yes, his son was ready to rule the North, young or not. Thank you for telling me this, Lord Varys. I will pray they have a happy and fruitful marriage. I hope they will be able to give me a lot of grandchildren. They can either play with me in Winterfell or visit my body in the crypt because I died here. I do not care. House Stark and the North will be safe, that's all that matters. He said honestly to the man in front of him. Varys looked at him in shock, followed by pity. I'm very sad to hear this, Lord Eddard. I actually quite liked you, and it saddens me to hear you choose dead like this. If you change your mind, just ask for Rajan and I will come. I wish you all the best and goodbye," the man said before leaving. He barely registered it. All he could think about was Rob and his marriage to Ricard's daughter. The fact that it happened would mean that Kat had agreed to advance the wedding. That would mean that both his family and the North was united as one, even without him. He had done everything he could to strengthen the North for winter and to help Rob's reign be strong and prosperous. It seemed it was bearing fruit much earlier than he expected, but that didn't matter. He spent the next few hours thinking about all of his family and friends in the North. He finally fell into a long pleasant sleep, thinking about a vision of Rob with his own children running around Winterfell. In his dream, Kat, Bran, Rickon and Jon were all by his side, with Sansa and Arya having happily married good northern men, sons of his friends. It was the best sleep he had ever had in the south. Chapter 20, The Battle of the Green Fork. 299 AC. Ricard Karstark. He felt the early afternoon sun on his skin as they were riding through the glowing green hills of the Riverlands. They had been marching for 5 days, since they left the Twins. He had a force of around 18,500 men. Only 800 of those were cavalry, so it would be very hard to win against an army full of Westerland horse. Still, he felt confident. His scouts had told him that the Lannister army, that had crossed the Trident, barely numbered 18,000. It seems the earlier messages of Sir Brynden Tully's attacks were true. Even with the 1,500 men that had left under Sir Flamant Brax, the army should have close to 19,000, but they didn't. He silently chuckled at the news, not for the first time. Never in his life had he hoped to outnumber Tywin Lannister when Robb told him of his plan. It would still be impossible to rout the Lannister force, as he had almost no cavalry to pursue them. Even more, it would be difficult to win the battle with such a cavalry disadvantage. That didn't mean he wouldn't try. If he could get into the Lannisters' faces, taunt them and make a solid defensive position, he could win. Even if he didn't, his original orders to force the Lannisters to do battle would be fulfilled. Win or lose, he would make the Lannisters pay for it with blood. He had thought long and hard on his battle plan and formations. He had come to the conclusion that he would use the lords and houses that he trusted the least on the front. It would strengthen his own position in the north, if some of his more powerful rivals lost troops. Besides that, it would strengthen Robb's position as well. If the houses that were less loyal took the brunt of the damage and not his most loyal supporters, Robb's command would be unchallengeable and he and Aelys would be safe. As such, he had decided that the first lines would be made from troops of houses Bolton, Dustin, Ryswell, and of course the Freys. He would deliver himself to Tywin Lannister before he would endanger a loyal Northman before one of that weasel's Southron troops. From a personal point of view, it would benefit House Karstark a lot if Houses Umber and Marndale also had some big losses. However, the Great Jon and Lord Wyman were some of the strongest supporters of Robb and House Stark, and so he wouldn't risk it. It was more important that Robb had as many troops available as possible, and especially from those loyal houses. Lord Walder had sent a number of his sons, grandsons and bastard offspring with his 3,000 infantry to join his army. All 3,000 of them would be on the front in honored positions. He would even make them believe that it was to build goodwill between their houses with their upcoming bond. In truth, he didn't trust Lord Walder or his offspring. Sir Jared is a prideful fool and Sir Hosteen is both a great warrior and an idiot. He didn't even bother to know the rest of them in these few days. They were all scheming, both amongst and against each other, and it would do Robb's armies good to have less of them. So, he had made up his battle plans. It seems the Blackfish really had done a number on Lord Tywin, as he had expected to meet the Lannister army sooner, but they were clearly delayed. His scouts under the command of Robert Glover had told him they would come upon the army tomorrow. The Glovers had been able to either fend off or eliminate most of the Lannister scouts. He was confident they didn't know of the split and maybe not even his own exact position. If everything went as planned, he was told that they would come upon the Lannisters next midday. When he looked to the right, he saw a nice position to make camp on a nearby hill. The field he had eyed for the next battle was only a few miles away, so this would be perfect. He shouted the order and they made their way. 2 hours later his whole vanguard had been camped and their tents raised already. Those men were now preparing the defensive positions for the night, as the last of the main body of men arrived and started putting up their own tents. His rearguard would arrive in the next half an hour with the necessary amount of the baggage train. The rest was left more to the north in yesterday's camp, as to make sure it never fell into Lannister hands. The next hour he spent checking on the palisade and stakes around the camp. When everything was in order, he went back to his command tent and sent orders to call his commanders to him. The time until they arrived, he spent checking and rechecking all of his plans. Everything was in order, but you could never be too sure. With the arrival of Osric and Harmondumber, the younger brother and son of the Great Yon, they were complete. On the morrow we will clash with the main Lannister army. Our duty is to make sure they do battle and commit to it, as to give Lord Robb the ability to strike against the Kingslayer. Unexpectedly we find ourselves outnumbering the enemy slightly. However, we have only 800 cavalrymen to their 7,000. It will be impossible for us to rout the Lannisters tomorrow, but that doesn't mean we can't win. He started explaining. The plan is to take up a defensive position, here. He continued as he pointed towards the map in front of him. It's a series of small hills some 4 to 5 miles in front of us. We will bait the Lannisters into attacking us. There are two options: 1, the Lannisters attack themselves; 2, our vanguard will attack theirs and slowly retreat, pulling them into our lines. The result will remain the same. Behind the vanguard, there will be stationed 3 lines of infantry along the whole battlefield, with archers in 4 lines behind on top of the hills. Our cavalry will be on the left, as the river covers our right flank. It is our objective to bait the Lannisters in and destroy them with our archers, while our infantry tries to hold them along the line. He laid out his plans. We will never pursue or charge trough them, and always keep our position. Am I understood? If any of our troops break formation to run down from the hill, the Lannister heavy cavalry will charge into the hole and we will be slaughtered. If we hold position, the Lannisters can attack us whatever they want, we will throw them back. The greatest problem is their heavy cavalry. As such, the first 2 lines will consist of mostly spears and pikes, with men with axes, maces and swords mostly concentrated in the 3rd line, and reserves to assist and plug holes in close combat if necessary. We will put up a small line of stakes along the weakest sides of our line to further inflict casualties and slow down their charges. As he said this, he saw many of the more experienced generals like Major Sir Wyn, Osric Umber and Sir Willis Marndale nod, while Roose Bolton looked at him intently. The 3 lines will all consist of over 3,000 men, with a vanguard of 800 men in front. The vanguard will be commanded by Lord Sir Wyn and consist of troops of houses Free and Serrin, he said as he looked upon the man who nodded stoically. When battle is joined, the vanguard will join the first line to make sure it can better resist the Lannister cavalry. The first line will position just on the beginning of the hill and will be under the command of Lord Bolton. Under him will be the Bolton troops, augmented with the Dustin, Roswell, Tall Heart and Lock spears and pikes. He said as he looked upon Roose. The man nodded expressionlessly. The second line, positioned a few hundred yards above them on the slopes, will consist of the majority of the Freys and the spears and pikes of both the Flints, the Slates and the Hornwoods, under the command of Sir Hosteen Free. The third line that will be above them consists of the remaining infantry of the aforementioned houses, combined with the forces of houses Umber and Glover under the command of Osric Umber. These lines are to move in to aid the line in front of them when necessary, or must form another front if the line in front of them was to break. He said as Osric and Sir Hosteen nodded at him, both eager for a command. The reserves, consisting of around 4,500 infantry, will consist of the troops of houses Marndale, Mormont, Stark and my own house under my command. The reserve will also consist of 200 cavalry under the command of Robert Glover. The remaining 600 cavalry on the left will be led by Lord Hornwood. Our almost 3,000 archers will be under the command of Sir Willis Marndale. He finished, looking around the table. Any more questions? Who will command the Freys together with Lord Sir Wyn? Sir Jared Free asked, clearly eyeing the position to get some glory. Fool. The whole mission of the vanguard was completely lacking glory. They would most likely have to charge into a larger Lannister vanguard and retreat whilst fighting and being pursued before joining the first line in the thick of the fighting once more. He had put a few hundred Freys there to thin out their lines and to not lose any more Northmen, as most of the vanguard would be captured or killed. The only reason that he put Major there was because he needed an experienced and trustworthy general to carry out his orders. If the vanguard didn't retreat in time, his whole plan could fail and he could lose those men for nothing. If you mean that you put yourself forward for the job, I would accept. However, I'll make myself clear, you will not serve next to Lord Sawin, you will serve under him. He has complete operational command of the entire vanguard, although you can be the leader of the free detachment and his number 2 if you so wish it. He said, making sure the man understood who was in charge. Clearly disappointed and a little angry, the man accepted the position. Good, if the gods are just, they will make sure he is killed or captured in the fighting. Any others? He said as he looked around the room. None replied, and so he looked around at their expressions. Sir Hostinfrey, Osricumber and Harleys looked pleased with their commands. Sir Willis and Robert looked calm and collected. He was glad. He didn't want to offend the Mandaelis and didn't know if Sir Willis would be offended that he wouldn't be in the thick of the fighting. Major and Roose Bolton looked serious, clearly understanding their important but dangerous positions, which was also good. He had wanted to put the phrase in the first line but couldn't rely on them to be experienced enough not to break at the first charge. Bolton was a lot of things, but he would hold the line with skill and authority, that was sure. Good, well, I suppose you go check on your men and the defenses of your sides of the camp once more. We march an hour after sunrise tomorrow, he said evenly. All the men nodded and left the tent. He looked at the maps once more. He hoped that this would work. If the Lannisters didn't attack him and refused to do battle, he would fail in his endeavor. If his lines broke or his commanders didn't listen, they could lose the whole army. He looked calmly over everything he had done and planned once more and saw that everything was in order. In the worst-case scenario, he would always be able to retreat everyone except for the first 2 lines, and they were made up of the more dubious or smaller houses anyway. He left the command tent and went into his personal tent next to it. He picked up a mug of ale and thought of his sons. Harryon was leading the Karstark cavalry and he would do well. He showed true promise of being a good future lord and he was glad about it. His 2 youngest sons would serve with their cousin Osric as a part of an honor guard around Robb. They would make him proud too, he was sure of it. He hoped Robb would be able to free Riverrun, but he trusted the boy that had become a 4th son to him. First unofficially, now official by marriage. He sat atop his horse on top of the largest of the 3 hills his army had gathered on. His whole army had been ready here for over an hour and at last the Lannisters had arrived. He saw how the enemy center consisted of most of their infantry. Thousands of heavy horses were positioned on his left with even more men, infantry and cavalry alike, under the standard of the Golden Lion of Lannister in reserve. What interested him most, was the vanguard of the enemy. It was positioned somewhat towards the river on the right and he saw clear weaknesses in the Lannister line there, too clear. No way that an experienced general like Tywin Lannister would make such a mistake. He probably expected Robb to rashly jump into the hole and push him against the river. Even if that isn't his plan, it matters not. He had his own plan and he would stick to it. The Lannisters would not dictate how this battle went. Even if his plan worked, it would still be close. The Lannisters could afford to make multiple heavy cavalry charges and he didn't know if his lines could withstand those. Well, it would be clear soon. He gave the signal for his vanguard under Meager to attack the Lannister one under the banner of 3 dogs on a yellow field. The Mountain commanded it, perfect. If that man wouldn't rashly follow Meager until he crashed headlong into a Bolton spear wall, he didn't know who would. His men attacked quickly but the Mountain was ready for it. A fierce fight ensued, as he saw the Free Knights go very deep in the enemy position, killing many enemies. Sir Jared, you fool! You can never retreat from there, he mumbled, and soon it proved to be true. When it was time, he ordered the horns to sound for the retreat of the vanguard as planned. It was clearly visible how most of the Sawin troops, followed by a portion of the Freys, managed to retreat in something coming close to an orderly fashion, while a group of around 150 Freys became surrounded on all sides as the Westermen pushed forward. Meager safely managed to reach the Bolton spear wall, however the Mountain made a devastating charge with a few hundred men on the retreating soldiers just in front of the Bolton position. The only positive was that most of the Lannister van cut through, slowing right into the spears behind, and a fight ensued. As he looked back towards the Freys, he saw from up above how many of them were surrendering. Bloody southern cowards, he cursed loudly. They had lost close to 200 men for nothing but the glory of some unimportant Free. At the line however, it was clear Roose Bolton was making short work of Clegane's force even with dozens of men still charging in. He wasn't the only one to have seen this, it seems, as he heard Lannister trumpets as their archers and centre moved forward. He looked to the side, where one of the light horse he had set up as messengers stood. "Go to Sir Willis. Say that he must keep his archers ready and can shoot whenever he deems it fit, but make sure he targets either the archers or incoming cavalry." He commanded the man, who immediately rode off towards the archers. He watched the fight below as the Lannister centre advanced until a sudden movement from the left made him look. He saw how the Lannister heavy cavalry came in action and charged right at the left side of the first line. He immediately called and pointed to two more messengers. "You, go to Lord Hornwood and say that he must countercharge that cavalry right after they make contact with our line. You, go to Sir Hosteen Free and tell him to send his spear on the left down to augment the first line or it will fall. Go." The men left immediately. He heard the hooves of thousands of heavy horse thunder across the field towards his line and prayed that they would hold. Suddenly he heard the sound of thousands of bows being loosened and moments later they came down among the horsemen. He saw dozens, if not over 100 fall, but still the charge continued. Again, the bows loosened and now he heard the screams of the horses dying below, still thousands marched towards his line. He looked to the second line and saw how some 400 spearmen were making their way down to augment the first line. When they were almost at the line, a third arrow volley loosened at the perfect time and this one was devastating. He saw at least 300 riders go down and many obstructed the horses behind them in their charge. Still the sickening crunch of the charge was heard as over 1,000 heavy armored cavalrymen crashed into his line at top speed. Behind them even more followed, as those that had been slowed down joined the attack. He heard screams, death cries and the sound of steel hitting steel. He saw how hundreds of Bolton, Locke and Dustin men were trampled under the charge, but they managed to stop the charge along the length of their line. He saw how a large group split off and tried to circumvent his line and attack the rear, but they were stopped in their tracks by the free spearmen. That same group was countercharged by Lord Hornwood and his horse moments later, and he smiled. Hundreds of enemy horse were pinned by their own troops on the right, spearmen in front and a cavalry charge to their left. The Lannisters also realized how bad this would be for them if they stayed in this position and charged their men at arms in across the whole line. The effect was clearly visible as the first line immediately started to buckle because of the enemy's overwhelming numbers. He also saw how the Lannister bowmen were targeting the cavalry under Lord Hornwood and so he had to retreat up towards his original position. A big part of the Lannister cavalry saw the opening immediately did the same, retreating back out of spear and arrow range in an unorganized mess. He shouted at a horn blower. "You, blow the signal for the second line to advance." The man and his companions quickly started blowing on their instruments. "You," he shouted to a messenger, "ride to Sir Willis and tell him to stop firing at the archers and target just behind our first line. He needs to thin out the Lannister ranks. If he complains about friendly fire, tell him it is a necessary sacrifice." The man looked shocked but left anyway. "You," he asked another one, "ride to Osric Umber and tell him to stand at the ready." He saw how the second line immediately marched down and soon they had stabilized the front. Even so, his line was still outnumbered. The troops there wouldn't hold forever, especially not if these Freys surrendered as quick as the others. He couldn't commit more troops now though, as the Lannister archers had the same idea as his own and were shooting at his line. Sending more men would just mean taking unnecessary casualties through arrow fire for now. His men down below were slightly outnumbered, but they had a slight hill advantage and so had his archers. He also seemed to have an advantage when it came to archers, which was handy. He looked at the situation sternly, as the minutes passed but didn't feel the need to change anything. Then he saw how the Lannister heavy cavalry was reforming itself on his left. It looked like almost 2,000 men got out of the lines and back into position. He saw how a few hundred fresh men from behind the center joined them. Looking at his line he saw how most of it held firm. It looked solid, except for left side of his line. He saw how it was still buckled and weakened from the earlier charge, although it had stabilized. It wouldn't be able to hold a second charge like that in the same place, and if they broke, he would lose the battle. He sent another messenger to Sir Willis to make sure that he would target the cavalry when the time came. If he sent in the third line now, there was still a chance that his lines would break. If so, they would lose their entire army. If he didn't, they could never hold. He looked over the battlefield once more and realized that the Lannister had 2,000 more heavy cavalry in reserve. It was at this moment he saw that he could never win. He would have to throw more men into the fight and would kill thousands of the enemy infantry, while his archers heavily damaged theirs, but a charge would break him sooner or later. If he sent in the third line, they would charge into his archers and all would be lost. He would have to send his reserves there, while his army would be surrounded and cycle-charged by the enemy horse. It would be a Pyrrhic victory for the Lannister as they would lose thousands more men, but it would be a decisive one nonetheless. Better to keep the army intact and fight another day. He had gotten the better of the fighting today. Sometimes you have to quit while you're ahead. He made the decision quick. He ordered Robert Glover to him and ordered him to screen their retreat with his cavalry and sent orders to Harleys to make one charge into the enemy flank before quickly retreating and doing the same. This would create an opportunity for the men on the front line to flee. Messengers were sent to the Umbers to compose a small rearguard before retreating their host. He had also sent another message to Sir Willis. The archers needed to shoot a hail of arrows on the left, just before Lord Harley's charge connected. After that, each archer needed to shoot 4 or 5 more arrows at the center and right side of the line before packing their things and retreating with the third line. All of this was meant to create the most chaos in the enemy line below. It could slow down the enemy's response, and every minute could save hundreds of his men. He watched as Lord Hornwood's charge connected with the line successfully before the Lannisters started theirs. It did exactly as he hoped and destabilized the line for a short while. This was all the cavalry needed to retreat, and at the same time he sounded the horns for the general retreat. The third line and reserves were already marching and soon the archers joined them. A huge rout also started at his line. He saw how in some parts it resembled some order, as smaller groups of Freys, Boltons, Hornwoods and Flints marched up the hill. Most of it was a complete rout though. A great number of the troops made it behind the Umber rearguard of some 300 to 400 men, as his plans to destabilize the Lannister front worked. He also managed to surprise them, as their cavalry only now came into action. With most of the men either running towards the columns marching north or surrendering to the incoming cavalry, he knew he needed to leave as well. He spurred on his horse and he and his retainers rode to join the retreating army. They had marched for a few hours until they reached the camp that they had stayed in 2 days ago. Parts of the stakes and the defensive perimeter were still intact, and so he ordered his troops to stay and rest here. All of them were already settled, and the maesters and healing women that had joined his army were busy looking at the wounded men, while the healthy ones rested. As evening had fallen now, he had called his commanders with him to report on their losses. A few nobles had been taken prisoner. Half a dozen Freys, Rickard Ryswell, Meager and Sir Donal Locke had been taken by the Lannisters, while Roose Bolton was wounded but managed to join their retreat. Some had died, among them a Ryswell cousin and 1 or 2 Freys, but no lords or heirs. Concerning the men, they had lost around 200 of their cavalry and some 4,000 infantry. The Boltons had lost over half their force, the Dustins, Tallheart and Ryswells 2/3 of their spears and pikes, while the Locke spear contingent almost ceased to exist. The Freys also lost over 1,000 men, and the Serwins almost all of the 400 men they had sent in the vanguard. All of the other losses were smaller. The Lannisters' forces would probably be similar. To his estimation they had lost the whole of their vanguard, among them Gregor Clegane. It had apparently taken 7 men at once to surround and take down that monster, even while he was still recovering from some wound the Rivermen had given him. Besides that, they lost a little over 1,000 of their heavy cavalry and maybe 1,500 to 2,000 infantry. Some of those might yet recover, but not many. All in all, it was a great battle for their side. They had managed to engage the Lannisters, as ordered, but they had done so much more. They had made them pay similar losses, even when you counted all the prisoners and wounded men they had to leave behind. However, the losses the Lannisters had taken were much more valuable. Spearmen and Levi could be replaced relatively easily, but heavy horse was a hard thing to come by. He had also succeeded in his secondary objective. The Boltons had lost the majority of their footmen. The Dustin and Ryswell losses were less, as only their spear and pikesmen had been engaged, but their commander Rickard Ryswell had also been captured, while some cousin of his had died. The Freys had lost 1/3 of their overall infantry as well, but most importantly Sir Jared Free and his annoying kin were captured by the Lannisters. The man had cost him almost 200 men of his force, and he wouldn't forgive that easily. Sir Hosteen had followed orders adequately and had made it out of the fighting. He was busy trying to reorganize his men now to get them into some kind of shape. There would be more time for that later. He would retreat towards the twins. There, he would decide on what to do, depending on what his scouts told him then. He sat down and wrote a letter to Robb telling him of the battle, which almost felt like a victory. He would send a rider to the twins, from there on a raven could deliver it to Riverrun. He also wrote a letter to Alis to tell her everything and smiled when he addressed the letter to Lady Alis Stark. The Freys would have to send it on to Winterfell. That night he slept happily, feeling that Tywin Lannister might not be that great of an opponent after all. Chapter 21, March in on Riverrun. 299 AC. Robb. They had left the twins over 2 days ago. They had marched through the Riverlands, and at the sight of their banners some petty lords and knightly houses had joined their army. In total they didn't count more than 200 men, but it gave his army more legitimacy in these lands. What did matter was the reinforcements that had just come over the hill. Lord Jason Mallister had arrived with 1,500 men to join their force. The man rode on a brown destrier at the column of his force, a cape of purple wool flying proudly from his shoulders. He motioned to his companions, and the small Jon, Tor, Ed, Os and Robin Flint joined him with a dozen guards as he galloped towards the force. "Lord Jason, it is good to see you here," he called out as they neared the group of rivermen. "Not as good as seeing you here, Lord Robb. It joys my heart to see you here, to protect the land of your mother." The man boomed approvingly. "The land hasn't been freed yet, but hopefully we can manage that soon enough." "May I present you my companions?" he asked politely. The Riverlord nodded in reply. "This is Small Janumber, the heir to Last Hearth. Next to him is Jon Snow, my brother. These are Eddard and Torrhen Karstark, sons of Lord Rickard Karstark and Osric Karstark their cousin. Lastly this is Robin Flint, heir to Widow Swatch. Pleasure to meet you, young lords. I present you my son and heir Patrek," the Lord of Seaguard said as he waved to the younger man next to him. The man trotted his horse forward and said, "Well met, thank you all for coming to aid our land and liege." "Well met indeed, Lord Patrek. It seems we have a lot to discuss, Lord Mallister. Would you and your son care to join me?" he asked polite, but urgently. "Of course, lead the way," the man responded. The encounter with Lord Mallister had been 3 days past. In total his force now counted a little over 6,000 men. Some 4,500 was made up of horsemen, with the rest being infantry and archers from the Riverlords who had joined along the way. He had expected this to be all, maybe augmented by a few more Riverlanders who had fled from Riverrun. Never in his life had he expected to see a force of over 1,000 men, all wearing the fish of House Tully, coming towards him. What surprised him even more was the man leading them. His granduncle rode on his black war horse as if he was made for it. His chest was puffed forward and he wore a smug smile on his face. When they finally came eye to eye, the man said, "Good to see you finally chose to show up, nephew, you took your time all right," the man voiced, but the smile on his face betrayed he was very glad they were here. "As you know, the north is vast, Lord Brynden. It takes a while for our troops to gather. We came here as fast as we could," he responded calmly, glad to see the man again. "Where is the rest of your force, Robb? I heard you were marching to meet Tywin Lannister in battle, but I see you here with a small force. What does this mean?" his uncle asked curiously. "Come, uncle. We have a lot to talk about. We will camp here for today and find your force a place to stay." The man nodded and shouted at the young, brown-haired man to his side to encamp the army next to House Mallister's force, before riding after him alone. Os had ridden onto the army and made the men put up his commander's tent quickly. He entered the tent and saw some of the maps already laying on the newly placed tables. Os, Harry, the Great Jon and Domeric Bolton were already waiting for him. In the time it took to offer them all a drink, Roose Riswell, Owen Norrie, Lord Jason Mallister and Lady Mage arrived. Sir Wendell, Sir Stephen Free and Lord Glover arrived only a small moment later. As all his main commanders had gathered together, he spoke up. "So, uncle, it's time we talk. The man picked a chair and seated himself at the table. Yes, it is nephew. First tell me, where has the majority of your army gone? He picked a chair and sat himself at the head of the table. We split at the twins. After some negotiations, we managed to get House Free to join us. Our infantry marches under my father-in-law to engage and distract Lord Tywine. That way I and the army you saw already can march towards Riverrun and take the Kingslayer by surprise. Lord Tywine won't be able to assist him in any way possible, nor will his scouts be in the area. A smile crept on the face of his uncle. Well, that makes things easier. I certainly have had my run-ins with the old grumpy lion, so some rest to take on his stupid son will do me good. The man said, and many of his commanders laughed. Yes uncle, tell me about those so-called run-ins you had. We have heard rumors, but we would like to know the tales. I would also like to ask you why you weren't at Riverrun when the battle happened. He said, very curious about the tale his uncle was to tell. I will in a moment, Rob. First, I would like to know what this father-in-law business is you said. I suppose you mean Lord Ricard Carstock, as I don't see him here. In my knowledge, the man is the father of your betrothed and not your father-in-law. His uncle said, piercing him with his blue tully eyes. He felt the blush come up on his cheeks as he thought of Alice and the nights they had had together. As he was in the process of composing himself, the great Jon laughed. Ha, our young lord here couldn't wait to marry her till after the war, so they married in front of the army at Moat Cailin just before they left. Lord Rob was so lovesick he came late to every meeting those few days they had together. At this all the Northmen laughed loudly, while the rivermen in the room snickered a little as well. You and Alice married in front of the army before marching south? His uncle asked knowingly. Yes, we did. Mother, Sansa and Rickon were there as well. They went home with Alice to Winterfell after the wedding. He responded honestly. Good. The Blackfish nodded. How fare my niece and her other children? They are all right. Both mother and my sisters were quite shocked with the news of father, but they are doing well enough. Rickon doesn't really understand and he misses father and me now, but he's fine as long as mother and Sansa are there to care for him. All three of them cheered up because of the wedding and having something to do with the preparations, so that was good too. He explained. I'm happy to hear they are doing well in the current circumstances. Where was Arya in this? You didn't mention her. His uncle asked. In Winterfell, there must always be a Stark in Winterfell. He answered seriously, strangely sounding like father. He wasn't the only one to notice, however, as all Northmen hummed and nodded in agreement. His uncle nodded once more at this. Well, with that out of the way, I think it's almost time for me to tell my story. Before that, I just want to let you know that Theon Greyjoy has been spotted moving through the Riverlands to the west at great speed. He seems to have used the confusion in the capital to flee with 3 or 4 companions. As he was your father's former hostage, I thought you should know. His uncle said. Theon. Moving through the west. Is he trying to get home? Never trust the bloody Ironborn. How long will it take until that brat finds himself on our shores again? This time at the head of a longboat full of raiders like his ancestors. Lady Mage grumbled, and understandingly so. The Mormonts had gained their island after his own ancestors had driven off the Ironborn, however that didn't stop them from trying to take it back. They had been attacking the Mormonts for over a millennia. He looked at the Lady of Bear Island. If they do so, we will throw them back into the sea like we have always done. If you feel like you should warn your kin for a possible danger, feel free to do so. Then he looked at the other lords. The same goes for all the other houses on the Sunsist Sea. I won't send any troops back, but no one ever died from a possible warning. At this many of Sunsist Sea nobles were deep in thought, but no one spoke up. The Blackfish looked around for a while before a huge grin spread over his face. Well, I think it's time that I tell you how I've been playing cat and mouse with a lion these past few days. All men moved forward in their chairs, eager to hear of the exploits of his famous uncle. First, why I left. My nephew Edmure did not have a position of meaning for me in his army, nor did he have need of my counsel. As such, I asked him for 500 light cavalry to harry Lord Tywine's army, and he obliged, giving me Tully and Bracken men. The first thing I did was attack their supply lines. As he had quickly shoved all possible resistance to the side with his army, The old lion clearly hadn't expected this. I managed to capture 2 lightly guarded convoys in as many days. The food I shared amongst my men and the rest I gave to the people that had been devastated by the army coming through. The Blackfish started telling his tale. After that I attacked 2 garrisons of Lannister troops who were put along the supply route to guard it. Much good that did them. They were both placed in petty holdfasts and both easily fell in night attacks by my men. As with the convoy, I hang all the dead Lannisters from trees and holdfasts along the supply route with messages saying that lions aren't welcome in the Riverlands. His uncle told, and he saw how many of his commanders smiled grimly at that. This seemed to work a little too good to my liking, as no more convoys passed the next few days. Not being one to wait for the enemy to come to me, we left. Just in time that was, to hear that Clegane was marching with 1,000 men to burn Stonehenge and the surrounding lands. Not liking our lands being burned and half my force consisting of men of that area, we marched towards him. For the lands we came too late, but we rode like hell and managed to get on the scene, in the middle of the attack. Clegane's men were split between storming the walls, trying to push through the broken gate, or waiting to join the former 2 groups. We quickly charged the enemy outside the gates, routing half the total army in one charge. The Mountain himself, who had been in the gatehouse leading his men, led a countercharge and managed to fight himself to safety. One of my men managed to wound him with a spear in his side, but it wasn't enough to bring the giant down. In total the Lannisters lost some 300 men and 200 more were captured, while Stonehenge was saved. At this most of the men around the table nodded approvingly. Pausing, his uncle looked around and was clearly pleased with the reactions of the men around him. He quickly continued though. We stayed for a few days at Stonehenge, resting our men and taking care of the wounded. We also fixed up the castle's defences and repaired the gate. In that time Harry Rivers, Lord Bracken's bastard son, managed to gather some 100 extra cavalry from his father's lands and joined us when we left. This restored our troops to around 500, with the men we lost and the wounded we had to leave at Stonehenge. Harry is the young man you saw next to me when I rode in, a good lad that. A little reckless in a fight, but he has a good head on his shoulders. He quickly became my second in command. When we rode out of Stonehenge, we got the news that Lord Tywine had taken Harrenhal. Not being able to touch him there, we skirmished with some of his outriders and foragers for a while until he rode to the east to confront your army. The day he left we saw a golden opportunity and took it. First, we took out many of his outriders, effectively blinding him to most our movements. Then we attacked the rearguard's camp in the night. The camp was better protected than we had thought, but we still managed to cut a few dozen horses loose and put half a dozen tents aflame. His uncle said as he saw him smile smugly at the memory of the enemy camp in chaos. The next day we ambushed the same rearguard twice. The first time we cut into their lines dealing some damage, but we were quickly repelled by heavy cavalry. The cavalry chased our men down, and that's when Harry and 200 horse triggered the second ambush, where he managed to get into the line and into some of the enemy archers. In total Tywine's rearguard lost some 400 to 500 men and a lot of equipment in these attacks. The day after, the lion clearly had enough of our little fun, and so he sent 1,500 men under Sir Flamant Brax to chase us down. As we had taken some losses in the fights and were low on supplies, we had to pull back. This Sir Flamant, although not a genius, was actually quite capable. We had 2 skirmishes with him. The first, a night attack we pulled on him, failed as he was ready for it. We pulled back before our losses became too big. The second, we ambushed him in a small wooded area not far from the Red Fork. Here we had some success, but he managed to reform his lines quickly and so we couldn't deal him a decisive blow. After that we just let him chase us around the Riverlands for a while before losing them and pulling north. Sir Flamant led his troops to Riverrun and will probably have joined the siege by now. I planned to harry the Kingslayer's army next and attack their foragers, but wanted to link up with Lord Jason first. I managed to reform some wandering parts of Edmure's former force while my scouts looked for the Mallister army. To my surprise, my scouts came back to me with the message that Jason had joined a Stark army, and so here I am. He finished his tale. All men looked at him in astonishment after that incredible tale. Well, I'll drink to that Blackfish. The great Jon bellowed after a moment of silence. At this, all his men slammed their drinks on the table and chugged it whole in respect of the men's amazing accomplishments. He followed suit, not wanting to be seen as different to his men. "How big is the force you brought with you, Sir Bryndon?" Sir Wendell Mandaily asked. "I now have around 1100 men. 300 of my original men, some 70 left of Harry's force. We picked up some 100 more cavalry and the remaining 600 men are infantry from various lords we came across." His uncle explained. "That would bring the total of this army to 7,400 men, of which 5,000 horse." He summarized aloud. "A very capable force." His uncle said approvingly. "If you allow me, I think I have a plan to deal with that damned Kingslayer." The trap had gone very smoothly. The Kingslayer had marched into the valley with over 2,500 cavalry, chasing his uncle, and the trap had sprung. The force was being obliterated in minutes, and the Lannister seemed to realize this, as he gathered his men for a mad charge right towards him. He sees how the force of the man dwindles quickly, but still he marches on and successfully reaches his guard. Darin Hornwood rides towards him but is quickly slain by the Lannister, and before his lifeless body hits the ground the man rides on to find Ed in his path. They quickly trade 1-2 blows before the Kingslayer cuts his neck in a savage blow. To his anguish, he sees his brother-in-law's body fall to the floor. Immediately, Os and Tom move in to avenge him. The Kingslayer takes off Os's left hand with a lightning-quick move, and he can only watch in horror as the man's sword slices towards the neck of another one of his childhood friends. Just before it connects, however, the Lannister's horse shrieks a death scream as its neck is mauled by Ghost. The Kingslayer is thrown off the horse, his sword flying away. The man tumbles across the dirt but tries to get up quickly. "No, you don't," his brother's voice says, his sword against the man's throat. The Lannister clearly thinks about drawing his dagger, but suddenly Ghost is there. Silent as no beast should ever be, the direwolf suddenly stands but a yard away from the Lannister, as it bares its teeth. Slowly Sir Jaime removes his hand from his waist and sticks them in the air. "I surrender, Snow." Quickly, half a dozen men come and bind the man's hands. His feet too. He hears his brother say, while he still can't speak, too shocked at seeing his two friends cut so savagely. "Quick," the Smalljan shouts from where the fight had taken place. "Light a torch and bring it here, now." A torch is immediately lit and brought to him. "Pin him down," he shouts to Owen Norrie and Daisy Mormont. They marched into action and pinned a still screaming Os to the ground. "I'm sorry for this, my friend," Smalljan Umber says as he pushes the red, hot torch against his stump, burning the flesh. A horrifying scream went up from his friend before he finally lost consciousness. Just after, he heard Jon scream to the remaining Westerland knights. "The Kingslayer is captured, surrender now and you will live. If not, we will send your heads back towards the Westerlands where you came from." At this, the last remaining fighting men stopped and threw down their weapons. This finally broke him from his trance as he jumped from his horse and marched towards the Smalljan, sitting next to Os' body. "Is he?" he asked fearfully. "He lives," the man said seriously. "He lost the hand, but he will live. It is possible that a maester may need to take more of his arm due to infections, but I managed to quickly burn it off before he lost too much blood." "Thank you," he said, as he let out a sigh that he didn't know he was holding in. The Umber shrugged and mumbled something like "Poor bastard, at least it's not his sword hand." He then moved towards Ed and he saw Tos sitting with his brother's head in his lap crying. Ed's neck was cut clean open and his blood was everywhere. It had spilled all over Tos' hands and cloths, but his best friend didn't seem to notice. He looked once more at the lifeless body of his fallen brother-in-law and felt the tears streak across his own cheeks as he fell to his knees. He picked up the hand of the boy that had taught him how to ride his first war horse and sat there. He was vaguely aware of how Jon had taken over command in his absence and was ordering the men to loot the bodies and get their own fallen soldiers out of the battlefield to make them ready for a burial, as the prisoners were already being led away. None of it mattered though. He sat and watched the face of one of his brothers fall in slowly, as the minutes passed. The color slowly disappeared from his face and the blood from his neck had stopped flowing. After a while, he felt a hand on his shoulder and as he turned around, he felt fur envelop him from both sides. The fur moved and suddenly Grey Wind was in front of him, his head in his lap as he looked towards him sadly. At the same time Ghost licked his right cheek silently. He turned his head and saw how John silently stood behind him, his arm softly on his shoulder. His brother looked questioningly towards him and he nodded, snapping out of his grief. He got up and looked once more towards the body of Ed. Grey Wind slowly walked towards him, sniffing at the body. He threw his head back and let out a slow agonizing howl, in the same moment that he himself grabbed on John's shoulder for a hug. He broke loose, and asked his brother the prisoners and the dead. The army. All dealt with. His brother said stoically. Thank you. He whispered and his brother nodded compassionately. He looked around him and saw how the men of his guard all looked at him in understanding. The howl of his wolf drew many of their commanders towards them, thinking something had happened to him. Most looked relieved, but there was a very clear exception. Harry rode towards them questioningly, until he saw his brother's lifeless body laying on the ground, his head still cradled across To's lap. No, no, Ed, no. His brother-in-law screamed as he jumped off his horse and ran towards his brothers, one dead, the other absently sitting there in grief. All men looked grimly on the scene that was happening before their eyes and many turned away towards their duty to give the brothers some moment of grief alone. The only ones that remained were his loyal guard. He turned towards them and said, "It's fine, I'm safe here. Go and see to your families and men." As they left too, he walked towards Harry and the two of them hugged. Silent tears streaking over their cheeks. Quickly both of them got a hold of themselves again and Harry asked him where is OS. He turned around and walked Harry towards OS. Not him too. Harry silently whispered. No. He answered resolutely. OS is alive, he lost his left hand but the small John burned his stump quickly and stopped the bleeding. He will live. His brother-in-law nodded absently at that. In the distance he saw how a man with a cart was coming his way to bring OS towards the maester. Who did it? Harry suddenly asked, all grief in his voice turned into venom in a second. The Kingslayer, he rode towards me. Darren Hornwood tried to stop him but was killed in one blow. Next Ed tried to stop him, but failed. To and OS rode to revenge your brother and the Kingslayer cut off O's hand. The moment he was about to deal the killing blow, John's wolf bit out his horse's throat and my brother captured him. The cunt is still alive. After that. Where is he? I'll put his head on a pike myself. The man growled, hate and pain all visible in his voice. He took his brother-in-law's shoulders in his hands. We can't, Harry. He is too valuable a hostage. If we kill him, they will kill my father and all possible hostages they will take from your father's host. We can't. The man looked at him with hateful eyes but nodded and he let him go as he marched back to To. The brothers embraced one another as To finally let go of the body. He walked up towards them and embraced To as well. Can you arrange to send his body home? He belongs in Carhold with our ancestors, not here in some God's forgotten valley in the Riverlands. To asked. Yes, I will. I will have him and Darren Hornwood's bones sent to the north. OS will live, but he lost a hand. To just nodded at that. He left to take back command of his army, when Harry stopped him. Are you going to attack the Lannister camp as planned? He was asked. He nodded with a heavy heart. Ed's sacrifice can't be for naught. We'll attack in a few days, once everything here is dealt with and the army has rested. Harry nodded, before his eyes steeled. I want a command. I don't care what it is or who I attack but I want to bath in Lannister blood the coming days and I want them to know it is a Karstark who did it to them. Come with me to the meeting, we'll see what we can do. Ned. It had been a few days since Varys had visited him, or so he thought. No one knew in this place. He had thought long and hard on what to do but it was clear to him now. He was no maester but he knew his leg was horrible. The infection was very grave, and he would at the least lose his leg. If not, he would die. He was sure of that. The Lannisters clearly didn't look out for him and he would die within weeks anyway. He would never see his children again, but luckily all were out of the clutches of that damned golden-haired family. If he was to die, he would do it out there with his honor intact for the good cause. Not here forgotten in this dark cell. As such he had finally called for Rajan this morning, the name Varys held here. He had said he had wanted to confess. His moment had come, he would finally join his father, mother, brother and sister. The only thing that he feared was that he wouldn't be allowed to rest in Winterfell with his family. Knowing that that wasn't sure whatever he did, the choice between dying alone in a dungeon or a possible way to topple the Lannisters through it was easy though. His cell door opened, and he was dragged outside with 2 cold cloaks carrying him. He was blinded by the light when they got outside as he was dragged into the keep. He was carried in front of Varys, Cersei Lannister and her brother Tyrion Lannister. As promised, Your Grace. The slippery spider sat as he waved at him. Yes, thank you Lord Varys. She said. You finally wish to confess? She asked him and he nodded, trying to make a defeated impression. Good, get him outside towards the September of Baelor. I want all the people to see. She laughed menacingly. Cersei, this is dumb. He is far more worth as a prisoner. Keep him here, make him confess in front of the nobles and give him a bath for fuck's sake. Father will be wroth, if something happens to him. Tyrion said and he felt scared, as the small man clearly had more sense than his older sister. No, I want the people to know what happens to traitors. He must be punished. His confession will legitimize Joffrey's rule and after father beats his pup in battle, with Lord Eddard at the wall, the boy will have to bend the knee. The queen waved her brother's concerns away. At least take enough of the gold cloaks. The people are fickle, especially now that refugees from the southern riverlands are coming in and Renly has cut off our food supply from the Reach. Our guard here was severely damaged in capturing Lord Eddard. Tyrion pleaded, at what he thought was a very interesting conversation. The Lannisters seemed to be surrounded, Robb in the north, Stannis in the east and Renly in the south. Yes, yes. You do it. Ask how many gold cloaks you want and more, I do not care. She waved him away. Tyrion sighed and the queen walked off. He was then locked in a carriage, where he quickly lost consciousness. He was woken up by a bucket of water being thrown over his head. He looked up and saw that he was outside on the steps of the September of Baelor. Seeing that he was awake, Sir Ilyn Payne waved to some of the men over here to carry him. He was placed in chains before a sitting place where Joffrey, Cersei and the small council sat. Before him, thousands upon thousands of people had gathered. All looked at him with blood in their eyes. They were just trying to have a spectacle in their otherwise miserable life in this stinking city. More than a few of them looked hungry and desperate. Dear people of King's Landing. The blonde bastard of Cersei said. You have come here to finally hear the confession of the former hand of the king, Lord Eddard Stark. The man has committed treason and wishes to confess. He said with a smug and evil smile. He was pushed forward. He sat there on his knees looking to the crowd and for the first time in weeks, he didn't feel afraid. This was his fate. I come here to confess a treason, yes. However, not mine. I come here to confess the treason of the Queen Cersei Lannister on the late King Robert Baratheon. At this he heard a lot of gasps coming from everywhere, but he didn't dare wait and continued quickly. She slept with her brother the Kingslayer and all her children are his, bastards born of incest. They have no claim to the throne and are abominations to gods and men. He shouted as hard he could. The chaos that erupted was enormous. People started shouting everywhere. Joffrey screeched from behind him. Kill him. I want that traitor dead. Kill him. While the queen was screaming to silence him. He was grabbed and put on the execution block as he noticed how stones were being thrown towards the Lannisters and shouts of pushing and violence begin to stir from below him. As he was being held down, he heard what sounded like a scream of a man dying and then another. He noticed how more and more stones and other things were thrown towards Joffrey and the queen and as he forcefully lifted his eyes, he saw how hundreds if not thousands of people were storming the stairs of the September. Between them were only 100 or 200 gold cloaks, although they were quickly being reinforced from the gold cloaks that had been stationed on the stairs. Still a rain of stones went up towards these reinforcements, several men falling before they reached the line. Kill the traitors. Kill them all, I command you to kill them all. He heard the blonde shit scream from behind him but he didn't care anymore. The truth was out, there was no way this wouldn't spread. Sir Ilyn Payne grabbed a huge axe and prepared to swing. Having already made his peace with his gods and family long before he came here, He said all he had left to say. Stannis Baratheon is the rightful king. Joffrey is a bastard born of incest. He screamed at the top of his lungs as the axe came down. He felt a distinct pain in his neck and then everything went black. Chapter 22, Seeing Riverrun. 299 AC. Harry on Carstark. It was dark at night. He and his men had left the main force yesterday. They had found a bridge over the Red Fork and crossed it. He had let them rest for a few hours and now they were marching towards the southern camp of the Lannisters. To their scouts' estimations, the enemy counted some 4,500 men, mostly spears and archers.